It started like any other flight. The hum of the engines, the steady thrum of the air as the plane soared above the clouds, and the feeling of temporary freedom that only travel could bring. Ava Johnson settled into her seat, pulling out her headphones and preparing to lose herself in the quiet comfort of her thoughts. But just as she started to relax, everything changed. A voice over the intercom broke through the hum of the plane. "Excuse me, miss," a flight attendant's voice crackled. "We need you to come with us." Ava raised an eyebrow, her brow furrowing. It wasn't unusual for attendants to ask passengers to switch seats or adjust for safety reasons. But the tone was different this time. Tense, almost urgent. A moment later, 2 security guards appeared at her aisle, blocking her way. They didn't smile. They didn't explain. One of them, a tall man with a stern face, gave her a short nod. "You need to leave the plane," he said, his voice cold. Ava's stomach dropped. She stood slowly, trying to process what was happening. "Why? What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "It's a matter of security," the second guard muttered, his hand resting on the taser at his side. "Please don't make this difficult." She couldn't believe it. The flight was fully booked and she had been nothing but polite. Ava scanned the faces of the other passengers, but they were all staring at their phones, pretending not to notice. Her skin prickled as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just an inconvenience, this was a sign, a moment of humiliation, a mark of something deeper. Ava's eyes darted around. She saw the flight attendants whispering among themselves, avoiding eye contact. The tension in the cabin was palpable, but no one moved to intervene. No one spoke up. Her pulse quickened as she followed the guards, every step heavier than the last. The plane's cabin felt smaller, suffocating. She could hear the muffled voices of the other passengers as they murmured, likely wondering why she was being singled out. But no one dared to ask. No one dared to speak up. As she reached the front of the plane, she felt the weight of every gaze on her. The doors opened, and she stepped out onto the tarmac, feeling the cold wind on her face like a slap. She turned to the flight attendants, who stood behind the glass, watching. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered under her breath. A storm of frustration bubbling in her chest. The gate slammed shut behind her. Ava stood there, confused and furious. It was as if the world had just decided she didn't belong. It wasn't just about being kicked off this flight. It was about everything she had endured. All the microaggressions, the overlooked promotions, the subtle looks, and the whispered judgments that she'd been silently fighting against her whole life. This was the final straw. She walked away from the plane with her head held high, but inside she was burning with a desire for justice. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. She wouldn't let it be. As Ava made her way back into the terminal, her mind raced. She didn't know what exactly had just happened, but she knew this. She wouldn't just walk away from this without a fight. She'd been humiliated. Yes, but it was also the spark she needed. The thing that would push her forward. Something told her that this was the beginning of something far bigger than herself. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to Lily, her best friend. "You won't believe what just happened. They kicked me off the flight, if for no reason. This isn't over." Ava stared at the screen for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keys. She didn't know how, but she was going to make them pay, and so it began. What if you were wronged in a way that changed your life forever? What would you do to get back what you lost? Ava Johnson wasn't born into privilege. Far from it. Growing up in the gritty streets of Chicago, she quickly learned that the world wasn't going to hand her anything. It didn't matter how hard she worked, how much she sacrificed. There was always an invisible wall that held her back. That wall was made of judgment, bias, and systemic obstacles that were impossible to ignore. She was the only black girl in a mostly white school. Her classmates, more often than not, didn't understand her. They didn't get the struggles she faced every day, the microaggressions that seemed small to them, but built up over time to create a deep, abiding frustration. She was tired of being invisible, of being underestimated. But Ava didn't let it break her. No, she used it to fuel her fire. From a young age, Ava was driven by one thing, proving everyone wrong. Her mother, a single parent working 2 jobs, to keep the family afloat, always said, You'll never have to ask for respect, you'll earn it. Those words stuck with Ava long after her mother's shifts ended, long after she'd seen her mother fall asleep exhausted on the couch after a full day's work. Ava earned everything she had, including a scholarship to a prestigious university in New York. It was there, among the high-rise buildings and the promises of success, that she truly began to shine. She majored in finance, a field dominated by men and people who didn't look like her. The professors who taught her were often dismissive, and some of the classmates weren't much better, but Ava took it all in stride. Her strategy was simple: outwork them all. By the time she graduated, she had a resume that would make anyone proud. She landed a job at one of the top financial firms in the country, the kind of place where people expected the best of the best, and she delivered. Her rise through the ranks was swift, marked by one success after another. Ava wasn't just a numbers person. She was a force of nature. Her ability to read data, understand trends, and predict outcomes made her indispensable. Her boss, David Kramer, an older white man who had been in the business for decades, took notice. He often said, "Ava, you've got the kind of instincts that can't be taught. You're going places." And she was. But even as she climbed the corporate ladder, Ava couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. It wasn't the work, it was the way she was treated, the way people responded to her presence in the boardrooms, or rather, the way they didn't. Her colleagues in the firm, most of whom were white and male, would smile and nod when she spoke, but it always felt like a performance. They saw her as a token, a diverse hire, and not as an equal. Ava knew they didn't respect her the way they respected each other. They didn't trust her opinions as much as theirs. That realization hit her hard one morning when she was excluded from a high-level strategy meeting. Despite leading the analysis for the new project, her ideas were brushed aside. Instead, the men in the room offered their own versions, and no one seemed to care when those ideas turned out to be flawed. Ava was furious, but she didn't show it. Instead, she did what she did best. She worked harder. She knew that if she just kept pushing, eventually they would have to acknowledge her. She was a force they couldn't ignore, but that day never came. One day, during an internal audit, Ava uncovered an unsettling series of transactions: unapproved wire transfers, off-the-books dealings, and a network of shell companies that made no sense. It didn't take her long to piece it together. Her firm was laundering money, and the culprits were high-ranking officials in the company. It was a massive scandal just waiting to break. Instead of being rewarded for her findings, Ava found herself being ignored and even blamed for uncovering it. "This isn't your fight, Ava. Leave it alone," her boss, David, told her one afternoon in his office. "These things are complicated. You don't want to get involved in this." It was then that Ava realized what this was all about. They didn't care about her. She was just a tool, someone to exploit when convenient. But when it came to protecting the firm, she was expendable. The final straw came when Ava was passed over for a promotion she'd earned. The role, one that would have placed her as head of the department, was given to someone else, a man who had barely been with the company for a year, someone who didn't know half of what Ava did, but someone who fit the mold of what they wanted. The promotion wasn't about skill or hard work. It was about something much more insidious, a bias that would always keep Ava in her place. "It's just the way things are," David told her when she confronted him, a dismissive smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You'll find your way, Ava, but this just isn't your time." It was a slap in the face, and this time, Ava wasn't going to take it. She had spent years proving herself, working harder than anyone, all for the same outcome. The system would never allow someone like her to succeed. She wasn't just fighting against a company. She was fighting against an entire system that had been built to keep people like her down. After she was let go, Ava took a few days to process. She didn't cry, though she wanted to. Instead, she shut down all her emotions and started thinking. This wasn't just another setback. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The spark that would ignite her path toward revenge. She remembered that day on the plane, the moment when everything changed, the way she had been humiliated, tossed aside without a second thought. She had been kicked off the plane, but she wasn't going to let them get away with it. "I'm done," Ava muttered to herself as she stared out the window of her apartment. "I'm done being the good girl. It's time for them to see who I really am." Ava had never been the kind of person who backed down. She had always found a way to rise above the hate and the obstacles. But now she was done trying to prove herself to anyone. Now it was time to play by her rules. She started her investigation into the airline. What was supposed to be a simple personal vendetta soon turned into something much larger. Ava was a woman on a mission, and this time there was no stopping her. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Ava's plan to take down the airline wasn't something she dove into recklessly. No, she had learned over the years that revenge needed to be calculated, and every step had to be methodical. There was no room for mistakes. Her mind, once devoted entirely to finance and strategy, was now laser-focused on dismantling everything that had caused her humiliation. This was no longer just about a single flight. This was personal. It started with research. Ava had always been a quick study, and her time in the financial world had trained her to read between the lines. She began compiling data about the airline, its owners, its history, and most importantly, its financial practices. There were irregularities, patterns she could exploit. She dug through public records, analyzed their stock movements, and studied customer complaints and lawsuits. But the most crucial part was understanding the culture within the company itself. Why had this airline security team felt so entitled to kick her off the plane without any real explanation? The more she delved into the company's operations, the more she understood the kind of people they were: arrogant, untouchable, and used to getting their way. But Ava was about to change that. Her first step was to infiltrate. The infiltration Ava was no longer just a woman wronged on a plane. She was a woman on a mission. To take down this airline, she would need more than just information. She needed access. That meant getting close to the very people who worked there, people who had inside knowledge, people who could help her push her agenda forward. She started small. Ava created a fake LinkedIn profile under a different name, Lena Parker, a business consultant with experience in the travel and logistics industry. She connected with a few employees from the airline, making her profile look legitimate and impressive. Her goal wasn't to target high-level executives just yet. She was going after the people who had their hands on the day-to-day operations, the ones who could offer insider information, and who would be more likely to talk without much hesitation. In the weeks that followed, Ava befriended a few junior employees, people who worked in customer service, security, and logistics. The conversations were always casual at first, discussing work, company culture, and the day-to-day grind. But, little by little, Ava began steering the conversation toward the darker side of the airline. Rumors of mistreatment of passengers, questionable business practices, and most notably, security mishandling. One evening, after a few drinks at a bar just down the street from the airport, Ava found herself talking to Troy, a mid-level security manager who was clearly fed up with the company. He didn't realize who she really was, or how far his words would go. He just saw a sympathetic ear and someone who could understand his frustrations. "They don't care about passengers," Troy said, his voice low as he looked around the bar. "They don't care about anyone. It's all about the bottom line. Hell, half the time we're told to pull people off flights if it's going to delay us even 5 minutes. And the worst part? We get away with it. No one cares. There's always some excuse. Security threat, protocol issues, but we're just pushing people off because it's convenient." Ava's mind whirred as she processed his words. This was the key. The airline's disregard for passengers was systematic. They didn't just inconvenience customers, they actively mistreated them, and most of the time, it went unnoticed. Her own experience on the plane was just one of many. As the night progressed, Troy let slip more details. He talked about the internal pressure from higher-ups to maintain a pristine image, to hide complaints, to sweep problems under the rug. It was clear. This company was rotten to the core, and they'd been getting away with it for far too long. But Ava wasn't just looking for inside information. She was looking for leverage. By the end of the night, she had what she needed. The leverage Ava's next move was to play on Troy's dissatisfaction. She planted the seed for him to turn on the airline. Through careful questioning and manipulation, Ava managed to convince him to share the security protocols, internal emails, and documents that would prove how the airline had been hiding incidents like hers for years. She didn't need to push too hard. Troy was already on the edge, and all she had to do was nudge him in the right direction. Ava had always been skilled at reading people, understanding their weaknesses and motivations. With Troy, it wasn't hard to see that he was tired of the company's lies, tired of the system that had allowed him to hurt people without consequence. His willingness to help her was not just out of bitterness, it was a mix of personal frustration and a need for validation. Ava promised him that his actions would expose the company for the corrupt entity it truly was. By the end of the week, she had the documents in her hands, email threads, internal memos, and security reports that painted a damning picture of the airline's practices. This wasn't just about a wrongful eviction from a flight. It was about a company that systematically profited from its passengers' misfortune. With this newfound leverage, Ava's strategy became clearer. She would expose them, yes, but not in the way most people might expect. This wasn't going to be a simple lawsuit or social media campaign. Ava was going to hit them where it hurt, financially. But to do that, she needed more than just documents. She needed a plan, a complex, foolproof plan that would expose their darkest secrets and drain their resources. She'd been in the business of finance long enough to know that a company's weakness could often be traced to its financial vulnerabilities, and this airline, for all its arrogance, had plenty. The next step, Sava sat in her apartment, surrounded by stacks of papers, her mind racing with possibilities. She had the documents, she had the inside track, but now she needed to think big. She wasn't just going to take down the airline, she was going to make them pay in a way that would have ripples throughout the industry. This would be the kind of move that would make every company rethink how they treated their customers. But to do that, she needed allies. She reached out to a few trusted contacts from her days in finance, people who owed her favors, people who knew the ins and outs of corporate warfare. One of them, Benjamin Pierce, was a former colleague who now worked in a high-powered consulting firm that specialized in corporate turnarounds and hostile takeovers. Ava knew he would be the perfect person to help her navigate the complex financial webs of the airline industry. "Ben, I need your help with something," Ava said when she called him. "It's big, it's personal, and it's going to take down one of the largest airlines in the country." He didn't ask questions. He just replied, "I'm in." With Ben's help, Ava began to assemble her team. She wasn't just looking to expose the airline's wrongdoings. She was preparing for a full-scale financial assault that would cripple them. The game was on. Ava wasn't the type to leave things to chance. She had been underestimated her whole life, pushed down by the world, and now that she was in control, she wasn't about to let anyone slip through the cracks. The plan was set, and with Ben's help, everything was starting to take shape. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the detailed spreadsheet that outlined every move she needed to make. The papers in front of her were more than just data. They were the foundation of her strategy, a strategy designed to break the airline from the inside out. With the financial documents Troy had provided, combined with her own expertise, Ava had begun to uncover the airline's hidden weaknesses. They weren't just prone to negligence and bad business practices, they were vulnerable in ways that no one outside the industry would ever suspect. For weeks, she'd been digging into their balance sheets, looking for patterns of mismanagement and corporate malfeasance. What she found was staggering. Large sums of money being funneled through offshore accounts, dodgy transactions disguised as legitimate expenses, and gaps in their audit trails so wide, even a rookie could exploit them. But this wasn't just about showing the world the airline's dark side. It was about bringing them to their knees in a way they couldn't ignore. With Ben's connections to high-level investment firms and insider knowledge of corporate structure, Ava quickly realized that her best shot at doing real damage wasn't through a lawsuit or public shaming. No, she needed to hit them where it really hurt: their investors. Her plan was simple: a coordinated short sell. She would manipulate the airline stock price by leaking confidential information to a select group of short sellers. causing their stock to plummet. Once it dropped enough, Ava and her team would swoop in, buying the airline's shares at a fraction of their original value, and then, once the company was financially crippled, sell them back at a massive profit. But the real beauty of the plan wasn't just about making money. It was about crippling the company's public image and ability to recover. She wasn't just going to expose their corruption. She was going to break them financially and socially, leaving them with no room to hide. The first move Ben had already lined up the players she needed for the short sell. The market moves would have to be precise, timed down to the second. But before they could pull the trigger, Ava had to lay the groundwork. This meant leaking the information slowly, strategically, and ensuring the right people got their hands on it. The first leak came from an anonymous whistleblower. Ava used Troy's information to send documents to a few high-profile financial journalists, knowing that once the stories started to circulate, the stock would begin to move. She carefully orchestrated the release to coincide with earnings reports, ensuring that the media frenzy would amplify the impact. As soon as the news broke, Ava watched from her apartment, eyes glued to the stock ticker on her screen. The airline's stock began to drop. It wasn't a huge dip yet, but it was enough to catch the attention of the investors and traders who were paying close attention. Then came the second leak, internal emails detailing how executives had tried to cover up the very same financial malfeasance she had discovered. She made sure the leaks were consistent, drip-feeding the media with more details each day, painting the airline's leaders as deceitful and incompetent. By now, the damage had been done. Investors were pulling their money out. Shareholders were beginning to panic. And Ava, with her quiet confidence, knew the time to strike was nearly there. The blackout. But there was one more thing Ava needed before she could make her move. The airline had a huge presentation scheduled for investors, a big corporate event where they would try to reassure the public and investors that everything was fine. Ava knew the only way to truly take the company down was to disrupt this event, to give the public a final glimpse of the chaos behind the curtains. Through one of her inside sources at the airline, she got her hands on the event details. Ava's team was quick to set up a social media blackout, ensuring that no one at the event would be able to post, tweet, or share anything about the presentation. She also planted false reports that would circulate during the event, giving the audience a completely different view of the airline's financial stability than they expected. It was a bold move. But as the date of the presentation grew closer, Ava could feel the pressure building. Everything was coming to a head. The world would soon see just how deep the corruption ran, how far the executives were willing to go to keep their dirty secrets hidden. The strike, the day of the presentation, arrived. Ava and Ben watched from a secure location as the airline executives took their stage, each one oozing confidence and arrogance, attempting to downplay the damage done by the leaks. They made promises of restructuring, new strategies, and a bright future ahead, but the stock price continued to plummet. The executives' smooth smiles began to crack as they realized that despite their best efforts, the investors weren't buying it. News outlets continued to report on the leaks, amplifying the company's problems. Ava had timed everything perfectly. As the presentation continued, she made her final move. Through a coordinated effort with her network of short sellers, she made sure that the market would take a nosedive. The floodgates opened as investors rushed to sell, and the stock price spiraled downward. Ava didn't waste any time. She swooped in, buying as many shares as she could at rock-bottom prices. Within hours, the airline's market value had dropped by billions. They were teetering on the edge of collapse. The aftermath by the end of the day, Ava knew she had struck a decisive blow. The airline's leadership was in chaos, their investors were in panic mode, and the media had already begun to report on the huge losses the company had incurred. But the best part was yet to come. The airline couldn't just sit back and hope things would settle. With their stock price decimated and their reputation destroyed, they would be forced to respond. Ava leaned back in her chair, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. This was only the beginning. They would have no choice but to negotiate, to beg for a lifeline, and when they did, Ava would be ready. Ava stared at the glowing screen in front of her, watching the ticker move in real time. The world was beginning to take notice. The airline was officially in freefall. Their stock was plummeting, and their executives were scrambling behind closed doors, trying to figure out how to salvage a situation that was rapidly slipping out of their control. It had only been a day since Ava and her team executed the short sell, but it felt like a lifetime. The chaos she had created was palpable. In the past, she would have been content just knowing her adversaries were hurting. But this was different. This was something far bigger. This was the moment when she would finally make them pay, not just for kicking her off that flight, but for all the passengers they'd mistreated over the years. Ava didn't just want revenge. She wanted justice. The press conference. The airline's leadership knew they couldn't afford to sit back and wait for the storm to blow over. By the time the stock drop reached double digits, they had no choice but to address the public. They called a press conference. Their last attempt to save face. Ava knew this was coming. She'd been tracking the airline's every move for weeks, so she wasn't surprised when their CEO, Bradley Thornton, appeared on screen. He looked exactly how she had imagined him, polished, confident, and completely disconnected from the reality of the situation. Bradley cleared his throat as the press room filled with reporters. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to assure you that the airline is fully committed to the safety and comfort of our passengers. We are taking immediate action to address the unfortunate leaks that have surfaced in recent days. This is a calculated attempt to damage the reputation of our company, but we are resilient and we will come through this stronger than ever." Ava chuckled to herself. Resilient? They were barely holding on. The more Bradley spoke, the more Ava realized how clueless they were about the real reason their company was crumbling. As expected, the stock continued its downward spiral. The reporters weren't buying the rhetoric, and neither was the public. More and more stories about their questionable practices began to surface. Ava's leaks had done their job, but the financial assault wasn't over yet. She watched as Bradley shifted uncomfortably under the barrage of questions from the press. "Can you explain why your financial practices were so questionable? Even after the numerous warnings you received?" one reporter asked. Bradley's face reddened. "We've always adhered to industry standards, but like any company, we've faced challenges along the way. We are investigating the situation thoroughly, and we're confident we will resolve any discrepancies." Ava snorted. Investigating the situation had already been investigated by her. The call to arms behind the scenes. Ava's team was readying for the next phase. The stock was tumbling, but the airline's executives still had plenty of cash reserves. Ava had learned a long time ago that money alone wasn't enough to take down a company like this. What they needed was leverage, and Ava had just the right tool. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, the final devastating blow. The airline's financial reports, those sweet damning documents Troy had leaked, were about to make their way into the hands of the right people. Ava contacted her contact in the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. David Spencer was an investigator who owed her a favor from an old deal she'd helped him with in the past. With a few strategically placed phone calls, she'd ensured the SEC would get the tip-off they needed to launch a full investigation into the airline's financials. While the SEC wasn't going to take immediate action, the mere hint of an official investigation would send the airline's stock into a tailspin. It wasn't just the investors who would be worried. The SEC's involvement would make the media frenzy that much worse. She could already imagine the headlines: "Airline under investigation. SEC scrutinizes financial malfeasance." As soon as she sent the documents to David, she knew the news would break in a matter of hours. The shift in power. That evening, the first news outlets began reporting the SEC's involvement. By morning, the story was everywhere. Ava's plan was working, the tide was turning. The public was getting the full picture now. The airline wasn't just a corporate giant. It was a corrupt, manipulative entity that had been exploiting passengers. For years, Ava watched as Bradley Thornton's face appeared on the screen again, this time during a second press conference. His previously confident demeanor was now replaced with anxiety, and Ava could almost hear the panic in his voice as he tried to reassure the press. "We are cooperating fully with the SEC's investigation," he said, though his words lacked the usual force. We want to assure our investors that we are committed to correcting the situation. We will take all necessary steps to address the issues that have been raised. But Ava wasn't just watching Bradley's downfall for entertainment. No, this was about more than that. The stock collapse. Ava watched as the stock market reacted to the SEC's involvement. The stock fell further, faster than she could have hoped. Investors were pulling out, scrambling to distance themselves from the company. The value of the airline continued to drop, and soon enough they were officially in a state of crisis. By the end of the day, the stock had lost over 25% of its value. The airline was on the verge of a full collapse. Bradley's carefully curated image was now in tatters. All that remained was for Ava to finalize her position in the company, her profit. Ava had always known she would strike at the right moment. By this time, the short-selling phase was almost over, and her team was ready to buy back the shares they had snatched up when the price had reached rock bottom. In less than 24 hours, they'd bought up a significant chunk of the airline's stock at a price so low it was almost absurd. Her team was preparing to sell their stock at a massive profit. The timing was flawless. Ava knew that by tomorrow the media would be full of stories about the airline's total collapse. Investors who had been too slow to react would lose everything. The final Ava smiled as she leaned back in her chair, watching the numbers climb on the screen. It wasn't just the money, it was the feeling of having orchestrated something so intricate, so perfectly timed, that it would be talked about for years to come. The airline was finished. The only question that remained now was how long it would take for them to admit defeat. But for Ava, the answer didn't matter. She had achieved her goal. She had exacted her revenge in a way no one would forget. By the time Ava woke up the next morning, her phone was already buzzing with notifications. The world had woken up to the fallout of her masterstroke. The airline had issued a public statement, but it was already too late. The SEC's investigation, the leaks, and the stock collapse had already left them vulnerable. Their announcement was merely a desperate attempt to regain control, but Ava knew better. The real damage had already been done, and now it was time to watch the pieces fall into place. She sipped her coffee as she scrolled through the headlines. Airline CEO under investigation for financial mismanagement. SEC cracks down on airlines' questionable practices. And, the one that made her smile the widest, airline shares plummet, a tale of corporate malfeasance and betrayal. Ava hadn't just made them look bad. She'd shredded their reputation. Every article, every social media post, every investor conference call now had the same thing in common: the image of a company drowning in scandal. And none of it had been Ava's doing directly. It had been the result of her strategy, of her timing, of her leaks, and of the quiet chaos she had sowed behind the scenes. Bradley's desperation? Bradley Thornton had never imagined that his polished corporate empire could come to this. His meticulously crafted persona, as a confident, trustworthy leader, was cracking piece by piece in front of the media. It wasn't just the financials that were the problem, it was the public perception. The leaks that Ava had orchestrated painted him and his executives as corrupt, manipulative, and most damning of all, greedy. He sat at his desk in the CEO's suite, staring at the storm of news articles that bombarded his screen. The stock price had fallen more than 40% in just 48 hours. Shareholders were furious, employees were anxious, and the board of directors was pressuring him for answers. But the worst part? He had no idea who was behind the leaks. The anonymous whistleblower, the journalists who'd run with the story, the SEC's sudden interest, all of it pointed to something much larger than a simple corporate misstep. Bradley had spent most of his life in the cutthroat world of business, but nothing could have prepared him for this. And worst of all, he knew he couldn't fix it. He couldn't undo the damage. The investors were pulling out in droves. The media was eating up every detail of the leaks, and the airline's customer base was starting to shrink. Ava had managed to execute the perfect takedown. Ava's growing power. Ava wasn't content to just watch from the sidelines. She wasn't just a puppeteer pulling strings. She was a force of nature, and she knew that the final phase of her revenge was fast approaching. The airline was on the verge of collapse, and she had already profited massively from her short sells. But this wasn't about money anymore. This was about finishing what she had started, about ensuring that those responsible for her humiliation and mistreatment would never be able to recover. With the airline's reputation destroyed, Ava knew the board would be calling for new leadership. The question was, who would they turn to? And would they be foolish enough to bring in someone who could recover their finances, or would they pick another suit who was more concerned with preserving their own position than truly fixing the company? She needed to be ready to strike one last time, and for that she needed leverage. The Khalid was late afternoon when the call came. Ava had been expecting it, but she still felt the thrill of it when she saw the name on her phone screen. Ben. Hey, Ava said, answering the call with her usual calm demeanor. Ava, Ben's voice came through the line, a mixture of excitement and urgency. I just got off the phone with someone from the board. They're talking about an emergency meeting, a vote on a new CEO. This is our chance. Ava leaned back in her chair, a smirk tugging at her lips. She'd anticipated this. The company couldn't continue in freefall. They needed someone to take the helm and guide them through the mess. But the question was who? They had one shot to make the right decision or they would be lost. And who are they considering? Ava asked, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it from him. Bradley's not going to make it. Too much heat on him. They're looking at outside candidates. But here's the thing. They can't afford another failure. They need someone with clout, someone who can turn things around fast. And we both know that there's one person they could bring in who has the connections and the experience to save this thing. You. Ava sat up straighter. Me? Ben laughed lightly. Yeah, you. You've been playing this game so well. It wouldn't surprise me if they came crawling. They might need a white knight to fix their mess, and guess what? You've got the leverage. Ava's mind raced. She had been manipulating the stock, the media, the public perception, but she'd never considered inserting herself directly into the power vacuum at the top of the company. She had all the cards now. But there was one thing she had to be sure of. Would she really want to take the reins of the very company that had wronged her? Ava's decision as the night wore on. Ava sat in her apartment, reflecting on Ben's words. She wasn't just playing a game anymore. She had a chance to reshape everything, to not only destroy the airline but to take control of it herself. She could become the one who decided who flew, who paid, who succeeded. The offer was tempting. The idea of sitting in that CEO's chair, of controlling the very empire that had kicked her off that flight, was intoxicating. But more than that, it was the ultimate power. She would be in charge and no one would be able to touch her again. Her phone buzzed with another message, this time from Troy. She opened it to find a document attached, a list of potential candidates. For the CEO role, a list that included her own name, though it was buried under some of the more respectable candidates. She smiled. They didn't know what was coming. Ava had a decision to make. She could continue to wreak havoc from the shadows, watching as the airline disintegrated under the pressure of her carefully planned moves. Or she could do something bigger, something more personal. She could become the power they needed to save the company, and then use that power to destroy it from the inside out. The moment of truth. The next day, as the airline board prepared for its emergency meeting, Ava received another call, this one from the airline's legal team. We need to talk, the lawyer said. Bradley's time is up and the board wants to meet. They've realized the only person who can fix this is someone like you, someone with financial savvy, public relations know-how, and a proven ability to get results. Ava paused, considering her options. She could continue her revenge from the shadows. But what if the real satisfaction lay in walking into that boardroom, taking control of the airline and crushing it under her heel? With a slow, deliberate breath, Ava made her decision. She was going to take the job. Not just to save the airline, but to burn it all down from the inside, and when she was finished, no one would ever be able to underestimate her again. Ava arrived at the sleek, glass-walled headquarters of the airline early the next morning, her mind racing. The glass doors swung open as she stepped inside, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The building was impressive, a symbol of the corporate power the airline wielded in the industry. But to Ava, it was nothing more than a gilded cage, one that she was now poised to control. The boardroom, where the fate of the airline was about to be decided, loomed ahead like a battlefield. Inside, a dozen of the company's most senior executives sat around a long conference table. The tension in the air was thick, and Ava could almost taste the desperation in the room. They were desperate, and she knew it. As she walked in, all eyes turned to her. Some were skeptical, some were curious, and some, like Barbara Jacobs, the lead director, seemed downright hostile. But there was one look Ava recognized in the room. Fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of the collapse that seemed inevitable. Ava was the wild card now. She'd orchestrated their downfall, but could she be the one to rebuild it? The opening gambit Barbara was the first to speak, her voice sharp and authoritative. Ava, it's clear you've made your mark, but what makes you think you can run this company? You've spent your time tearing it apart. Why should we trust you to fix it? Ava met her gaze with a calm that bordered on chilling. I didn't tear it apart, you did, she said, her tone measured but her words carrying the weight of every single injustice she'd suffered at their hands. For you let it happen. Now I'm here to make sure it never happens again. The room fell silent. Ava's words hit like a sledgehammer, but she wasn't done yet. She walked around the table, her presence commanding attention as she took her seat. At the head of the table. The problem with this company isn't just bad financial practices or incompetent management, it's a fundamental lack of integrity, she continued. I don't just understand business, I understand people, the passengers, who fly with you, the employees who depend on you, and the shareholders who trust you to run this company responsibly. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, though many still looked unsure. The chair of the board, James Holloway, cleared his throat. Ava, we recognize your intelligence, but there's no denying the chaos your actions have caused. What we need is a leader who can stabilize the situation. Someone who can restore confidence, not just tear down the system. Confidence, Ava repeated, arching an eyebrow. You're looking for someone to maintain the system that's failing everyone. That's not leadership. That's cowardice. The board shifted uncomfortably, but none of them dared interrupt her. The proposal Ava paused for a moment to let her words sink in. She wasn't here to smooth things over or offer them false hope. She was here to take control and show them exactly what they had been missing. Here's what I propose, she said, her voice steady. We stop playing it safe. We stop being afraid of disrupting the system. We break down the walls that have been built up over the years, and we rebuild this airline from the ground up. I'll lead it, but only if I have full authority to make the changes necessary. Barbara's lips curled into a tight smile. And what changes do you propose? Transparency, Ava said immediately. Better treatment for passengers, ethical financial practices, and a complete restructuring of your leadership team. You've had decades to get it right. It's time for new blood, and that starts with me. For a moment the room was silent. They were all weighing the options in their heads. It was a gamble, but the alternative was letting everything burn to the ground. James Holloway leaned forward. You're asking us to trust you with the future of this company. Are you sure you're the right person for the job? Ava smiled, but it wasn't a smile of arrogance. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. You've already seen what I can do, she replied. And this time, I'm not here to just destroy. I'm here to rebuild. If you want to survive, you'll have to take that risk. The vote, there was a long pause, and then Barbara spoke again, her voice full of reluctant respect. We can't afford to let this drag on. We need someone who can act quickly, decisively. We'll take this to a vote. The room fell into an uneasy silence as the board members began casting their votes. It felt like an eternity, but Ava didn't flinch. She had already calculated the odds, and she knew she had a significant advantage. The SEC investigation, the falling stock price, and the public backlash had already weakened their resolve. They didn't have a choice but to agree to her terms. When the votes were tallied, the result was clear. Ava was the new CEO. The first day Ava stood at the head of the table again, but this time it was in front of a completely different group, her new executive team. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she wasn't nervous. She had earned this moment. She had worked for this. Now, it was time to put her plan into action. She addressed them with the same poise and confidence she had displayed in the boardroom. Things first, she began. This company is no longer about profit at the cost of passengers or employees. From this day forward, we will operate with transparency, ethics, and integrity. We will rebuild our reputation, not just with our investors, but with the people we serve." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time it felt like there was hope. But Ava wasn't done. "That's not all. We will streamline our operations, invest in our customer service, and most importantly, we'll focus on making the flying experience something that people trust and enjoy again." If anyone here has a problem with that vision, now is the time to speak up. No one did. The real work begins. In the weeks that followed, Ava hit the ground running. She immediately started restructuring the company, focusing on repairing the damaged relationship with both customers and employees. She made it clear that under her leadership, the airline would no longer tolerate corruption or neglect. Every executive, every manager, and every staff member was expected to align with the company's new values. No exceptions. She also implemented new policies for transparency. Quarterly financial reports were now made available to the public, and she held monthly town hall meetings with employees to ensure they had a direct line to the CEO. The transformation was immediate, and though not everyone was on board with the changes, many began to see the merit in her approach. Ava's ultimate goal was not just to rebuild the company, but to reshape the entire airline industry. She wanted to create a model of ethical leadership that would set a new standard, one that put people above profit, transparency above secrecy, and respect above exploitation. Bradley's fall from grace. As Ava's reign at the top continued, Bradley. Thornton's situation grew even direr. The SEC investigation, combined with the overwhelming public backlash, led to his resignation just weeks after Ava assumed her role. His once glowing reputation had become a cautionary tale in the business world, a symbol of corporate greed and failure. While he tried to maintain some sense of dignity, the writing was on the wall. His name had become synonymous with scandal. In the end, it was a quiet departure, one that no one would remember with fondness. Ava, on the other hand, was poised to enter her next phase of leadership. As her initiatives took hold, the airline's reputation began to recover. Slowly but steadily, the stock price had rebounded, and passenger numbers began to rise again. The public was watching, but this time they weren't waiting for her to fail. They were waiting for her to succeed. As Ava settled into her new role, the reality of her transformation at the helm of the airline began to unfold before her eyes. The initial improvements, better customer service, revamped communication with the public, and a fresh commitment to ethical practices were having the desired effect. The company was on a path to recovery, and Ava's reputation as a fearless, principled leader began to grow. But even as she reveled in her success, Ava knew that not everyone in the corporate world was happy with her ascent. In fact, she was certain that some were quietly plotting against her. Power, true power, came with a price, and Ava had no illusions about the enemies she had made along the way. Her methods were unorthodox, her rise was too quick, and many powerful people didn't like the way she'd shaken up the status quo. Ava didn't mind. In fact, she welcomed it. She had no intention of sitting back and letting anyone undermine her success. If there was one thing she had learned through all the manipulation and strategic moves, it was that the most dangerous enemies were often the ones who worked in the shadows. But Ava had been operating in the shadows her whole life, and she was ready to face whatever threats lay ahead. The first warning shot it started subtly. Late one night, as Ava sat in her office reviewing financial reports, she received an encrypted email from an unknown address. The message was short, but the threat was clear. "You're playing a dangerous game. You don't know who you're dealing with." Ava read the message twice, her mind working overtime to decipher its meaning. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the screen. The email didn't give much away, but Ava recognized it for what it was: a warning. She was no stranger to being targeted. After all, she'd been the one to take down a multi-billion-dollar airline empire. But this felt different. The words seemed to come from someone who knew exactly what buttons to push, someone who had resources of their own. Ava had a choice. She could dismiss the message as an idle threat from someone who hadn't fully grasped her power, or she could take it seriously. Of course, Ava chose the latter. She wasn't going to let anyone intimidate her. The next morning, she convened a meeting with her closest advisors and security team. She wasn't going to wait for the next move. She was going to take control of the situation before it got out of hand. The investigation Ava's security team immediately launched a discreet investigation into the email, tracing the sender's IP address and looking for any leads that might indicate who was behind the threat. Meanwhile, Ava turned her attention to the board members and executives who had been less than thrilled with her leadership. It was clear that some of them hadn't been too keen on her rise to power, and their silent opposition was starting to become apparent. She brought in Troy, her trusted confidant and chief of operations, to discuss her suspicions. Troy had proven invaluable in the past, and Ava trusted his judgment. "I don't think this is just an isolated threat," Ava said, as she stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office overlooking the city. "Whoever's behind this has resources, and they're watching me closely. We need to find out exactly who we're dealing with." Troy nodded. "Agreed. We'll dig into the board members, the executives, anyone who could have a personal stake in trying to take you down. It might not be the board directly, but it's likely one of their allies. We'll make sure it doesn't escalate." Ava smiled coldly. "Good. I don't like surprises, and I'm not in the mood to play cat and mouse. Power plays and politics." The pressure was mounting. As Ava dealt with the email threat, she also faced the growing internal conflict within the company. Several senior executives were disgruntled with her leadership and felt their power was being diminished. Ava knew that this was inevitable. Change, especially on the scale she was introducing, always had its detractors, but she didn't expect the covert resistance to begin so quickly. Barbara Jacobs, the lead director who had questioned Ava's ability in the early days, had become a vocal critic behind closed doors. Her old alliances were starting to show. While she still held her position on the board, her attempts to sabotage Ava's efforts were becoming more transparent. Barbara had an agenda, and she wasn't going to let Ava reshape the company without a fight. Ava had expected a power struggle. What she didn't expect was how deep the roots of the resistance went. In a corporate world built on secrecy, alliances formed and fractured behind closed doors. Ava knew that Barbara wasn't working alone. There were others, some of the airline's oldest executives, who saw her as a threat to their own influence. The game had changed. The stakes had been raised. Troy's discovery days later, Troy came to Ava with the results of the investigation. He had traced the email to a private server linked to a shell company with connections to some of the airline's most senior competitors. A rival conglomerate in the airline industry, Rex Airlines, had been quietly maneuvering to buy out smaller competitors and expand its own reach. Rex had been eyeing Ava's airline for months, but until now, they had never directly threatened her. "Rex Airlines," Troy said, his voice tense, "they're behind the threat. And from what we're seeing, they've been trying to infiltrate your board through a couple of the executives you thought were loyal." Ava's eyes narrowed. This was more serious than she had anticipated. Rex Airlines was a massive player in the industry. If they were making a move on her company, they weren't just looking to take her down, they were looking to crush her entirely. Ava stood up and paced the room, her mind racing. "So we're talking about corporate sabotage on a massive scale. They've been working through the cracks, manipulating the system from within." She stopped and turned to Troy, her voice steely. "How do we stop them?" Troy's answer was simple, but the weight of it hung in the air like a storm cloud. "We expose them." The first strike with the stakes raised, Ava decided to make her move. The best way to stop Rex Airlines from taking her down was to expose their tactics publicly and force the board to choose sides. She called in her legal team and began planning a full-scale investigation into Rex's covert activities. It would be a risk. If they moved too quickly or made a wrong turn, it could backfire. But Ava had no intention of letting anyone get away with trying to destroy her company. She also knew that the time had come to deal with Barbara Jacobs and the other executives who had been undermining her. They would be removed one way or another. The next morning, Ava issued a public statement, hinting at a major investigation into corporate espionage in the airline industry. She didn't name names, but the message was clear. Rex Airlines was no longer safe from scrutiny. As soon as the statement was released, the media exploded. Speculation ran rampant, and Rex Airlines was thrust into the spotlight. Ava had made her first strike, and the world was watching. The end of the calm. That evening, as Ava relaxed at her apartment, her phone buzzed with notifications. It was the latest update from her legal team. Rex Airlines was scrambling. Their stock had taken a hit, and whispers of an internal investigation had sent their executives into damage control mode. But it wasn't just the corporate world that was watching. The public was starting to take notice too. Ava leaned back in her chair, her mind focused. She had known this day would come. She had known that enemies would emerge from the shadows, seeking to tear her down. But this was just the beginning. She had more enemies than she could count, and some of them were closer than she thought. But Ava had come this far by trusting no one, and she would continue to play the game on her terms. It was time to finish what she had started. Ava had always known that power in the corporate world was like a house of cards. One wrong move and everything could come crashing down. But as she dove deeper into the investigation of Rex Airlines and the sabotage from within her own company, she realized that the stakes were far higher than she'd anticipated. This was no longer just a battle for control of the airline. It was a fight for survival, and the rules were being rewritten with each new piece of information that came to light. Uncovering secrets, it was late one evening when Ava received an encrypted document from her legal team. The file contained evidence that made her blood run cold. Rex Airlines had been playing the long game, infiltrating not just her company, but the entire airline industry. They had been behind several small acquisitions of regional airlines, all with the intention of consolidating power in the industry. But it wasn't just about expansion. It was about gaining leverage over key players like Ava. Rex had been systematically placing their own people into powerful positions within rival companies, including hers. Barbara Jacobs, Ava's chief critic on the board, had once been a close ally of Rex's founder. That revelation hit Ava hard. She'd suspected Barbara's motives, but now she had the proof. Ava wasn't surprised, though. She'd learned long ago that trust was something to be earned, not given freely. What did surprise her was the scale of the operation. Rex Airlines wasn't just a rival, they were a threat to the entire airline industry. If she didn't act quickly, they could destroy everything she had worked for. But the discovery didn't stop there. The file also revealed that Rex's involvement in the airline's internal sabotage wasn't limited to Barbara. Several other senior executives had been compromised. A network of covert agents had been planted inside her company, strategically positioned to sabotage any attempt to rebuild the airline's image. The calm before the storm. Despite the overwhelming nature of the revelations, Ava refused to be rattled. She couldn't afford to let fear dictate her next move. If Rex thought they could take her down with a few shadowy maneuvers, they were gravely mistaken. Ava had fought too hard to let them win without a fight, but she knew that the time for subtlety was over. Rex Airlines had made their move, and it was time for Ava to respond. This would be her most dangerous and daring move yet, but if she succeeded, it could cripple Rex's operations and expose their true agenda. Planning the counterattack, Ava called for an emergency meeting with her closest advisors, including Troy and her head of security, Carla, who had been instrumental in uncovering the threats against her. They gathered in the war room, an unassuming conference room that had become the nerve center of her operations. "I've got the proof," Ava said, her voice steady. "Rex Airlines has infiltrated our company. They've placed people at every level, and they've been undermining us from the inside." Troy leaned forward, his expression serious. "How far does it go?" "As far as the board," Ava replied, slamming her fist on the table. "Barbara Jacobs and several other executives are in on it. They've been feeding Rex information and trying to sabotage everything we've worked for." Carla's face hardened. "We need to hit them where it hurts. But we have to be careful. Rex is dangerous, and if we make a wrong move, they'll retaliate." Ava nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She'd been playing the game with her eyes open, But now it was time to go on the offensive. We're going to expose them, not just their agents within the company, but their entire operation. We'll leak the information to the media and make it public knowledge. Rex won't be able to survive the backlash. Troy raised an eyebrow. You're sure about this? Once we go public, there's no going back. Ava leaned back in her chair, her mind already racing with the logistics of the plan. I'm sure. If we want to beat Rex, we have to make sure they're caught in the act. I've got everything we need to bring them down. Breaking the news the next day, Ava took to the media. She issued a public statement laying out the evidence against Rex Airlines and detailing the infiltration within her company. It was a risky move. If she didn't handle it properly, it could backfire. But Ava wasn't about to let Rex get away with it. We've uncovered a corporate conspiracy that involves one of our competitors, Rex Airlines, Ava said in the press conference. This isn't just about business. This is about integrity, trust, and the future of the industry. We will not stand by while they try to destroy everything we've worked for. The response was immediate. The media exploded with stories, and the public's reaction was swift. Investors, customers, and industry experts were all talking about the bombshell revelation. Rex Airlines, once seen as a titan in the industry, was now under intense scrutiny. The stock market responded, and Rex's shares plummeted as the investigation gained traction. Ava knew it was only a matter of time before Rex retaliated. But she had prepared for that. They would come for her, but she was ready. This time she wouldn't be the one on the defensive. The battle begins. The following days were a blur. Ava's legal team worked overtime to compile all the evidence and secure their case against Rex. Meanwhile, Rex's executives scrambled to control the damage, issuing denials and claiming that the allegations were unfounded. But the media wasn't buying it. The public had already made up its mind, and Ava had positioned herself as the hero in this corporate battle. But Rex wasn't going down without a fight. Ava received a series of threatening messages from anonymous sources, warning her to back off or face serious consequences. But these threats only fueled her determination. If they thought they could intimidate her, they were sorely mistaken. As the days wore on, Ava's team worked tirelessly to track down the remaining agents embedded within her company. Each discovery only confirmed the extent of Rex's plot to destroy her. The conspiracy was deeper than she'd ever imagined, but now that she had Rex in her sights, there was no turning back. The turning point, in the midst of all the chaos, Ava received an unexpected call. It was from Agent Turner, a former security consultant who had worked with her in the past. He had information that could change everything. "I've got a lead on something bigger," Agent Turner said, his voice urgent. "You're not just fighting Rex. There's a bigger player behind them. Someone even more powerful pulling the strings." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected that Rex was merely a pawn in a larger game, but this confirmation made the situation even more dangerous. The stakes had just gotten even higher. "Who?" Ava demanded. "That's something we'll need to talk about in person. I'll send you the details." Ava hung up the phone, her mind racing. She had known the fight would get ugly, but this was something else entirely. Rex was just the beginning. If there was someone more powerful pulling the strings, Ava had to find out who it was, and fast. The phone call with Agent Turner had left Ava with more questions than answers. As she stared at the screen of her phone, her thoughts were racing. Who could be behind Rex Airlines? Who was the real mastermind orchestrating this entire plot? It had become clear that she was up against more than just a rival airline or a few disgruntled board members. There was a much deeper and more dangerous web being spun around her. Ava could feel it. The stakes were no longer about corporate competition or corporate sabotage. It was something darker, more personal. The meeting Ava didn't waste time. She knew that time was of the essence. If there was indeed someone pulling the strings behind Rex Airlines, she had to act quickly, before they could completely destabilize her company and her life. Agent Turner had insisted they meet in person. He wasn't one to make phone calls when the information was vital. Ava had learned to trust his instincts, so she agreed to the meeting without hesitation. The rendezvous was arranged for the following evening at an old, abandoned warehouse just outside the city. The location was off the grid, making it the perfect place for a private conversation. It was risky, but in Ava's world, it was a risk she was willing to take. Unveiling the bigger threat, when Ava arrived, the air was thick with tension. She pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of the warehouse, her car's headlights slicing through the fog. Agent Turner's car was parked in the far corner, its headlights turned off, blending into the darkness. Ava pulled her car into an adjacent space and stepped out, the cold wind nipping at her face. She was greeted by Turner, his tall frame emerging from the shadows, his face hidden by the brim of his hat. His eyes were sharp, though, as if they never missed a detail. "Glad you could make it," he said in his usual gravelly tone. Ava didn't waste time with pleasantries. "What's going on, Turner? Who's behind Rex Airlines?" Agent Turner motioned for her to follow him inside. The warehouse was eerily quiet, save for the sound of their footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. He led her to a small room in the back, where a computer screen sat on a desk, showing encrypted files and documents. "I've been digging into this for a while," Turner began, his voice low. "And I'm afraid you're right about one thing. It's bigger than just Rex Airlines." Ava's pulse quickened as she leaned in closer. "The truth is," Turner continued, "Rex is just one part of a much larger syndicate, and the person behind all of this is someone you wouldn't expect." Ava's brow furrowed in confusion. "Who? Who could it be?" Turner hesitated, then clicked a few keys on the computer. The screen flickered and a name appeared. Jonathan Westbrook. Ava froze. The name hit her like a bolt of lightning. Westbrook. The name was one she had heard before. A name whispered in the corners of the corporate world. Jonathan Westbrook was a reclusive billionaire businessman with a history of investing in high-risk industries. He was a name that never appeared in the public eye, yet his influence stretched across several sectors, including airlines, real estate, and technology. Westbrook. Ava repeated, her voice barely a whisper, "But he's never been involved in anything like this before. He's a shadow figure. No one even knows what he really does." Turner nodded grimly. "Exactly, that's why he's so dangerous. Westbrook has been quietly building a network of companies under his control for years. Rex Airlines was just one of his chess pieces, a way to manipulate the airline industry from the shadows." Ava's mind raced. The revelation sent a chill down her spine. Westbrook wasn't just any corporate mogul. He was a mastermind who had been playing a long game, manipulating people and companies from behind the scenes. "Why Rex Airlines?" Ava asked, trying to piece together the puzzle. "Why not just buy out the airline or take it over directly?" Turner turned to face her, his eyes intense. "Westbrook doesn't want control in the conventional sense. He's not interested in ownership. He's interested in power, influence. He manipulates from the shadows, pulling strings without anyone realizing it. Rex Airlines was a convenient vessel for his plan. He uses them as a means to destabilize the competition, create fear, and take control of markets." Ava exhaled sharply. She was beginning to understand. Westbrook's strategy wasn't about acquisition, it was about control, chaos, and leverage. And she had been swept into the whirlwind of his machinations, the plan to expose Westbrook. Now that Ava knew the truth, she had a new target, Jonathan Westbrook. She knew that taking down Rex Airlines was just a small piece of the puzzle. To truly win, she would need to expose Westbrook for what he was, an invisible puppet master who had manipulated the entire industry for his own benefit. But exposing someone like Westbrook wouldn't be easy. He had the money, the resources, and the influence to destroy anyone who stood in his way. Ava would have to be careful. One wrong move and everything she had fought for could be lost. "So what do we do now?" Ava asked, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "We can't just go after Rex anymore. We have to go after Westbrook." Turner's expression softened slightly, a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. "You're right. But going after him isn't going to be as simple as publishing a few exposés. Westbrook's network is vast. He's got eyes everywhere." Ava's mind worked quickly. She thought of her allies, Troy, Carla, and her legal team, who had been instrumental in her rise. They would need to work together like never before. She also had to be more strategic than ever before. Westbrook would only be exposed if she could outmaneuver him at every turn. "We'll need to dig deeper, Find every connection he has to Rex and other companies. We need to track down his partners, his employees, everyone he's worked with," Ava said, her tone determined. Turner nodded, already making plans. "I'll start gathering intel. But we'll need to move quickly. Westbrook won't sit idly by while you try to expose him." The first step. Building the case, Ava knew that exposing Jonathan Westbrook would take time, but the first step had to be taking down his allies. She couldn't go straight after Westbrook without solid proof and a clear strategy. The key was dismantling his network piece by piece. She called in Troy and Carla the following morning for a strategy meeting. They gathered in the war room, a room that had become her operations center, where every move was calculated and every detail mattered. "I've just learned who we're really up against," Ava began, pacing back and forth. "It's not just Rex Airlines, it's Jonathan Westbrook, and he's been playing us all along. We need to expose his network before we can go after him." Troy leaned forward. "So we go after his connections first? Start with the companies he's been using to manipulate the industry?" Ava nodded. "Exactly. We start small and build the case, but we can't just rely on traditional methods. Westbrook's too powerful for that. We need to get creative." Carla spoke up. "We've been following Rex Airlines for weeks now. We'll need to expand our focus and start looking at Westbrook's other assets. If we can tie his investments together, we can start to piece together the bigger picture." Ava smiled. She had the right team. Together, they would expose Westbrook's web of manipulation, and once they had enough evidence, they would bring the truth to light. Ava's plan was in motion. The stakes had never been higher, and every move she made now was carefully calculated. With the discovery of Jonathan Westbrook as the mastermind behind the chaos, she realized that taking him down wouldn't be simple. It would be a war of attrition, and war she knew required patience, precision, and allies. Shifting gears. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and strategizing. Ava's legal team and her most trusted advisors were working tirelessly to piece together the connections between Westbrook, Rex Airlines, and other companies he had his hands in. It was a web of influence, stretching across industries. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. Westbrook had been operating in the shadows for years, his influence permeating even the most unsuspecting corners of the business world. But Ava knew there was no turning back now. She'd opened Pandora's box, and now she had to face whatever came out of it. Troy and Carla were invaluable in this phase of the plan. Troy used his connections in the corporate world to dig into Westbrook's financial dealings, while Carla tapped into her extensive network of informants to gather intelligence. They had made progress, small but meaningful steps. But there was still much to uncover. Westbrook's true power, it seemed, wasn't just in his companies but in his ability to control people without them even knowing it. Ava's hidden weapon, Ava, had a secret weapon of her own. Ivy, a cybersecurity expert, who had been quietly working for her since the early days of her takeover at the airline. Ivy was a genius when it came to hacking into secure systems and retrieving data that others thought was untouchable. She had helped Ava before, but now her skills were needed more than ever. One evening, as Ava sat alone in her office, staring at the piles of evidence that had been gathered, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ivy. "I found something. You need to see this." Ava's heart skipped a beat. What had Ivy found? With a sense of urgency, she made her way to Ivy's discreet office, hidden in the lower levels of the building. When she arrived, Ivy was hunched over her computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "What did you find?" Ava asked, her voice low but filled with anticipation. Ivy didn't look up as she continued typing. "Westbrook's been using encrypted communication to coordinate with his people. I've cracked part of his network, but there's a catch. His main server is heavily guarded." Ava's mind raced. "Can we access it?" "I've already started the process, but it's going to take time. Westbrook's people are watching this network like hawks. If we're not careful, we could get caught." Ava nodded. She trusted Ivy's judgment. If anyone could crack through Westbrook's defenses, it was Ivy. But she also knew that time was of the essence. They couldn't afford to wait too long. "Keep me updated. I don't care how long it takes, But we need that data. Everything. We can find on Westbrook, his companies, his dealings. We'll use it to bring him down. Ivy nodded, her fingers still typing furiously. Ava left the room with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew the risks, but this was the only way forward. She had to take the fight to Westbrook. The calm before the storm. The next few days were filled with a strange kind of tension. Ava knew the next move could be the one that would either bring her success or destroy everything she had fought for. The risk of exposing Westbrook's network was enormous, but the rewards were even greater. If they could succeed, it would change everything. Rex Airlines would no longer be a threat, and Westbrook's influence over the industry would crumble. But as she prepared to strike, Ava's thoughts were preoccupied by something else. The people who had helped her get this far, her trusted team, had become more than just colleagues. They were her family now. They had all made sacrifices for this fight, and she had no intention of letting any of them down. Ava had to be careful. Westbrook wasn't just an enemy. He was a shadow, elusive and dangerous. His next move would be calculated, and he wouldn't hesitate to use everything at his disposal to stop her. She couldn't afford to underestimate him. Westbrook's retaliation. It wasn't long before Ava received her first warning. It came in the form of a message. An anonymous note slipped under her office door. The words were simple, but they sent a chill down her spine. "You're playing with fire, Ava. Westbrook doesn't lose. Not now. Not ever." Ava's fingers trembled as she read the message. The threat was clear. Westbrook knew she was coming for him, and he was ready to retaliate. She quickly called a meeting with her closest advisors. Troy, Carla, and Ivy gathered around the table, their faces grim. "He knows," Ava said, her voice steady despite the fear rising within her. "Westbrook knows we're onto him." Carla crossed her arms, her face hardening. "Then it's time we went on the offensive. He won't stop unless we make him." Ava nodded. "We have to move faster. Ivy, how's the server cracking coming along?" Ivy hesitated for a moment before responding. "I'm in, but there's a catch. Westbrook has security measures in place that could trace our access. We're playing a dangerous game here." Ava clenched her fists. "I don't care. If we back down now, Westbrook wins. We need everything we can get from that server. And then we go public." Troy spoke up. "You're sure about this? Once we expose him, there's no turning back. He'll come after us, and he won't stop until we're destroyed." Ava's eyes burned with determination. "I'm not backing down. I didn't come this far just to let him win." Breaking point. The days following that meeting were tense. Every moment felt like they were walking on a razor's edge. Ava could feel the pressure mounting from all sides. Westbrook's reach was vast, and the closer they got to exposing him, the more dangerous their situation became. On the 5th day after receiving the warning, Ivy finally came through. She stood in front of the team, a rare smile crossing her face. "We've got it," Ivy said. "I've accessed everything. All of Westbrook's communications, financial records, business dealings, everything. It's all here." Ava's heart raced. "What do we have?" Ivy began pulling up files on the screen. Westbrook has been using his companies as fronts for money laundering, illegal investments, and even funding covert operations in several countries. His involvement with Rex Airlines was just one part of a much larger global strategy. Troy leaned in, his eyes wide with disbelief. "This is massive. We can take him down with this." Ava nodded, her mind already racing. "We'll leak the information to the press. We'll expose everything. But we need to be careful. Westbrook will stop at nothing to keep his secrets hidden." Carla gave a sharp nod. "Let's do it then. Time to take him down." Ava sat at her desk, staring at the data Ivy had uncovered. The full scope of Jonathan Westbrook's empire now lay before her, its complexity both astonishing and terrifying. She had known that the man pulling the strings behind Rex Airlines was dangerous, but this was on a whole different level. Westbrook wasn't just a corporate mogul, he was a criminal mastermind, weaving a tangled web of illicit business, global operations, and secret deals that spanned continents. It was hard to fathom how one man could have so much influence without anyone realizing it. And now Ava was about to bring it all to light. But as she sat there contemplating her next move, She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. There was a subtle tension in the air, a weight that pressed on her chest as she realized how vulnerable they all were. Exposing Westbrook meant making him an enemy, and that could come at a cost, one she wasn't sure she was prepared to pay. A quiet night. The night was unusually quiet as Ava walked down the empty hallway of her office building. The lights were dim, casting long shadows on the floor as she made her way to the conference room where her team was gathering. It was late, but this was no time for rest. They had a plan to execute, and every minute counted. Inside, Troy, Carla, and Ivy were already seated at the table. They were going over the final details of their strategy. Ava could see the exhaustion in their eyes, but there was also a quiet determination. They had all been working around the clock to prepare for what was about to come. "Ivy, is everything ready?" Ava asked, her voice steady, though her mind was racing. Ivy nodded, her eyes focused on the screen in front of her. "I've set up the secure channels. The data is ready to be released the moment we pull the trigger. The public will know everything." About Westbrook's operations, his illegal dealings, his involvement in Rex Airlines and all of his front companies. Ava felt a sense of relief wash over her. The hard part was done, but there was still one question hanging in the air. Would it be enough? Exposing Westbrook's criminal activities could bring down his empire, but there were no guarantees. He had always been one step ahead, and even now he was likely preparing his counterstrike. "Carla, what's the press strategy?" Ava asked, turning to her head of communications. Carla leaned forward. "We've lined up interviews with top reporters who can help break the story wide open, but we need to time it right. If we go public too soon, we risk Westbrook's people. Shutting it down. We need to hit hard and fast." Troy crossed his arms, his gaze thoughtful. "And when we do, we need to be ready for the fallout. Westbrook isn't going to take this lying down. We have to anticipate his next move." Ava's mind raced. The risks were enormous, but there was no turning back now. If she exposed Westbrook, it would be the end of his reign of manipulation, but it would also make her a target. The thought of retaliation gnawed at her, but Ava steeled herself. She couldn't afford fear. Not now. "We go public tomorrow," Ava declared. "At dawn. We can't give him time to react. We'll release everything, every last detail." Everyone in the room nodded in agreement. The plan was set, and there was no more room for second-guessing. The moment of truth. The next morning, Ava stood in front of her office window, gazing out over the city. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden glow across the skyline. It was beautiful, but Ava couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom that hung over her. The calm before the storm. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Ivy. "We're set. It's all ready to go." Ava took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. It was time. She walked briskly to the conference room, where the rest of her team was already gathered. Ivy, Carla, and Troy looked up as she entered, their expressions tense but resolute. "Are you ready?" Ava asked, her voice sharp. Carla nodded. "The reporters are waiting for the signal. We've set up everything to go live the moment you give the word." Ava turned to Ivy. "How long until the data is out there?" Ivy glanced at her screen. "Minutes. Once I hit send, it'll be out of our hands." Ava's heart pounded. She knew there was no turning back now. Westbrook's empire would come crashing down, but at what cost? How far would he go to protect himself? She glanced at her team, each one of them ready for whatever came next. "You know what's at stake," Ava said, her voice steady but filled with an unspoken understanding. "We're doing the right thing. For Rex, for us, for everyone who's ever been manipulated by people like Westbrook." They all nodded in unison, and for a brief moment there was a sense of solidarity in the room. They were in this together. Ava turned to Ivy. "Do it." Ivy's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, with a single click, the data was sent. In that instant, the world shifted. The story was out. The fallout. It didn't take long for the news to break. Within hours, headlines were flashing across news outlets around the world. "Billionaire Jonathan Westbrook exposed in massive corporate scandal," screamed one headline. "Westbrook's secret empire unraveled," read another. The revelations about his illegal activities were stunning, and the public reaction was swift and unforgiving. The story quickly went viral. Social media exploded with outrage. Public figures, former employees, and whistleblowers came forward, corroborating the information that had been exposed. It was clear now, Westbrook was not just a corporate titan. He was a criminal mastermind who had been pulling the strings from the shadows for years. Ava watched as the fallout unfolded, her mind focused and sharp. But she knew that this was only the beginning. Westbrook wasn't going to go down without a fight. He would retaliate. He always did. The question was, how? A dangerous game as the day wore on. Ava's phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages. Her legal team was already fielding inquiries, preparing for the inevitable lawsuits that would come from Westbrook's allies. The media was hounding her, and even her employees at Rex Airlines were nervous. Would the company survive the storm? That was sure to come. Ava's thoughts were interrupted by a call from Troy. "Boss, we've got a problem," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "What is it?" Ava replied, her pulse quickening. "It's Westbrook. He's moving fast. We just got word that he's made contact with some of our top investors. He's already trying to discredit us." Ava's grip on the phone tightened. She had known retaliation was coming, but this fast, Westbrook wasn't wasting any time. "What's his move?" "We're still tracking it, but it looks like he's trying to buy people off. He's offering huge sums to anyone who will turn against you. He's playing dirty." Ava's stomach tightened. "Keep me updated. We need to stay one step ahead." Troy's voice softened. "Don't worry, Ava. We've got your back." She took a deep breath. The war had just begun. The first signs of retaliation came fast. Within hours of the explosive news breaking, Westbrook's empire was scrambling. Corporate boardrooms across the globe were flooded with emergency meetings. Investors were jumping ship, and lawyers were being deployed to contain the damage. The fallout from Ava's exposé was widespread, but it was only the beginning. Ava watched the chaos unfold from her office, the morning light streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across her desk. It was the calm after the storm, but it wouldn't last. She knew Westbrook wouldn't go down without a fight. He was far too powerful and far too dangerous to let one setback destroy him. The tides turned. Troy's phone call came just after lunch, his voice tight with tension. "Ava, it's worse than we thought. Westbrook's people are hitting us from every direction. Some of our investors are pulling out, and the media is painting us as the villains in this whole thing. They're framing it like we're the ones who created the scandal, not Westbrook." Ava clenched her fists, the weight of the situation settling heavily on her shoulders. She had anticipated some backlash, but this was bigger than anything she had prepared for. Westbrook wasn't just trying to discredit her, he was trying to turn the tide in his favor. "Who's behind it?" Ava asked, her voice cool but filled with determination. "It's his legal team, mostly. They've started a campaign to discredit you personally. They're attacking your character, saying you used underhanded tactics to get Rex Airlines, and that you're just as corrupt as he is," Troy replied. Ava let out a long, slow breath. This wasn't just a corporate battle anymore. Westbrook was going for the jugular. He was attacking her very identity, her reputation, the one thing she could control. But Ava had learned long ago that she couldn't let these attacks affect her. She had to stay focused. "We're not backing down. If we've got the truth, then we have the power. Keep pushing back. We've come too far to let him take us down with lies," Ava said, her voice unwavering. "Understood," Troy responded. "We'll need to double down on our media strategy and counter his attacks. I'll get the team on it." "Good. We're not just fighting for the company anymore. We're fighting for justice. We can't let him manipulate the narrative." A new ally as the media war waged on, Ava found herself at an unexpected crossroads. Just when it seemed like all hope was slipping away, an unexpected ally reached out. A former high-ranking member of Westbrook's inner circle, someone who had worked directly with him for years, contacted Ava. "I have information that could help you take him down for good," the voice on the other end of the phone said. "But you need to be careful. Westbrook doesn't forgive easily." Ava's instincts told her to be cautious. In a war this high stakes, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But this offer was too valuable to ignore. Whoever this person was, they had intimate knowledge of Westbrook's operations, and if they were willing to go public, it could be the breakthrough she desperately needed. "Who are you? And why should I trust you?" Ava asked. her voice hard and skeptical. "You don't know me, but I know you. You're the woman who took on the biggest airline in the world and won. I'm someone who used to work for Westbrook, up until I couldn't stand the corruption anymore. If you want to take him down, I can help you." Ava hesitated. She needed evidence, not empty promises. "What do you have?" "I've got files on his international operations, everything from money laundering to illegal arms deals. I can get you everything you need to expose him once and for all. But it's dangerous. If you go public with this, Westbrook will stop at nothing to destroy you." Ava sat back in her chair, thinking. This was the break she needed, but it came, with enormous risks. If she took this ally at their word, it could change the course of the fight. But if they were lying or setting her up, it could mean her downfall. "I'll meet you," Ava finally said, her mind made up. "But I need proof. I need something real." The voice on the other end chuckled softly. "You'll get it, just be careful. Westbrook has eyes everywhere." A dangerous meeting. The meeting was set in a nondescript cafe on the outskirts of the city, far enough from the prying eyes of Westbrook's people. Ava arrived with Troy and Carla, both of them by her side for backup. They were taking a huge risk, meeting someone with inside knowledge of Westbrook's empire. But Ava knew she had little choice. This could be the break they'd been waiting for. The person who approached them was a middle-aged man, his face hidden beneath the hood of his jacket. He looked around nervously, ensuring no one was following him before taking a seat at the table. "You must be Ava," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Peter. I used to run a lot of Westbrook's foreign operations. I've seen the things you can't imagine." Ava studied him carefully, trying to gauge whether he could be trusted. There was fear in his eyes, but there was also a certain resolve. This was no longer about money or power for him. He was looking for redemption, a way to right the wrongs he had been part of. "I'm listening," Ava said, her voice low and serious. Peter slid a folder across the table toward her. "Everything you need to bring him down. But you have to understand, this isn't just business anymore. You're going up against a man who'll burn down everything in his path to protect himself. You can't do this alone." Ava opened the folder carefully. Inside were documents, financial records, communications, and photographs that painted a damning picture of Westbrook's global network. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a criminal on a scale that made even Ava's previous discoveries seem small in comparison. "Where did you get this?" Troy asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Peter's eyes flicked nervously toward the door before he spoke. "I worked with Westbrook's people for years. I know how he operates, and I can tell you this. Everything you've seen so far, it's only the tip of the iceberg. If you release this information, it'll destroy him." Ava's eyes were fixed on the documents in front of her. The evidence was overwhelming. This could be the smoking gun they needed to take down Westbrook for good. But she also knew that going public with this would make her an even bigger target. "Thank you," Ava said, finally meeting Peter's gaze. "But we're not done yet. We're going to make sure this gets out to the world, but we need to be strategic. The last thing we want is for him to slip away." Peter nodded, looking relieved. "I'll be watching. And if you need anything else, you know where to find me." With that, he stood up and walked out of the cafe, disappearing into the crowd. Ava watched him go, a knot of uncertainty tightening in her stomach. The final countdown back at the office, Ava and her team went to work. The documents Peter had provided were staggering, revealing more corruption, money laundering, and illegal activities than they could have imagined. The walls around Westbrook's empire were crumbling, and Ava knew this was their chance to finish what they had started. But there was no time to waste. Westbrook was moving fast. He had resources and connections that could easily track down anyone who posed a threat, and Ava was at the top of his list. "Ivy, are we ready to go public?" Ava asked, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Ivy nodded. "We've got the evidence, we've got the media lined up, but it's risky, Ava. Westbrook has been quick to react, and he's already made moves against some of our allies. If we hit now, there's no turning back." Ava clenched her fists. This was it, the moment that would either destroy her or secure her victory. She looked at her team, Troy, Carla, and Ivy, all of them ready for the fight. "We hit now," Ava said, her voice resolute. We expose him for good. There's no turning back. As the team prepared for the next phase of their plan, the storm that had been brewing for so long finally broke. And this time, Ava wasn't just fighting for control of an airline. She was fighting for justice, for everything she believed in. Ava's pulse raced as she stared at the screen in front of her. The evidence was irrefutable, but the challenge now wasn't just gathering the truth. It was getting it out into the world without giving Westbrook the chance to cover it up. The global stage had been set, and Ava was about to deliver the knockout blow. With the documents from Peter in hand, Ava's legal and media teams were preparing for the final push. The plan was simple. Release the information in a carefully crafted exposé, one that would leave Westbrook with no place to hide. But simple didn't mean easy. The strategy. "We need to get ahead of the story," Ivy said, leaning over the conference table, her fingers tapping nervously. "If we let Westbrook control the narrative, he'll turn this against us. We have to release the documents first, but we need the media on our side. Big outlets, trusted names." Ava nodded, her mind racing. The media blitz would be critical. Ava knew how Westbrook worked. He controlled information, he manipulated perception. If they could flood the airwaves and social media with the truth before he had a chance to respond, it might be enough to change the course of this war. "We can't rely on just one release," Troy added, his brow furrowed as he scrolled through his phone. "We need to go everywhere. Major news outlets, social media, podcasts, blogs, influencers. We need to make sure this story's all over the place. If Westbrook thinks he can bury it with a few well-placed lies, he's in for a rude awakening." Ava stood and walked to the window, her eyes narrowing as she stared out over the city. She had come so far, further than she ever thought possible. But as the stakes rose, so did her sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about accountability, justice. "We'll hit them from all sides, full frontal assault, no mercy," Ava declared, her voice sharp. "And I'll be the face of this. I'll make sure the public knows who I am and what I stand for." The trapeze they finalized the details of the release, Ava's team was also preparing for the worst. Westbrook had not remained silent. He'd been laying the groundwork for a counterattack, a smear campaign against Ava, questioning her motives and casting doubts on her credibility. The night before the exposé was set to go live, Ava received an encrypted message from one of her sources at the airline. The message was short but ominous. "He knows he's preparing a strike." A chill ran down Ava's spine. Westbrook wasn't stupid. If he had caught wind of their plans, he would strike first. But Ava wasn't about to back down now. Not when she was this close. She turned to Troy. "I need you to go through everything again, check every angle, every loophole. Westbrook has a way of turning the tables, and I need to make sure we have no weak spots." Troy nodded. "I'll double-check everything. We'll make sure he can't outmaneuver us. The release, it was time." The moment had arrived. Ava sat at the head of the table, surrounded by her team, as the clock ticked toward the designated hour. Tension hung thick in the air. This was the moment that could make or break everything. Her fingers hovered over, her phone ready to send the final tweet that would set the world on fire. Ivy gave her a quick nod, signaling that all systems were go. With a deep breath, Ava hit send. The story broke, and within seconds the digital landscape exploded. Major media outlets picked up the story, and Ava's exposé hit the airwaves. The documents were released, showcasing the full extent of Westbrook's corruption, money laundering schemes, and international criminal activities. There was no denying it now. Westbrook's empire was built on lies, deceit, and exploitation. The fallout as the news spread like wildfire. The backlash against Westbrook was swift and unrelenting. Social media was flooded with outrage, and celebrities, politicians, and public figures quickly rallied to Ava's side. The public's anger was palpable. For years, Westbrook had been untouchable, his wealth and influence shielding him from scrutiny. But now that shield was shattered. Ava watched it all unfold, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhilaration. She had done it. The truth was out. Westbrook was exposed, but even in this victory, she knew the battle wasn't over. Within hours, Westbrook's legal team fired back, calling the exposé a smear campaign and accusing Ava of being a liar and a criminal. They released their own set of counter-documents, claiming that the evidence against Westbrook was fabricated. It was a game of cat and mouse, with both sides trying to control the narrative. But Ava had one advantage now: the truth. No matter how many lies Westbrook told, the weight of the evidence against him was undeniable. Ava's moment of truth, as the dust settled from the media frenzy, Ava found herself standing at the center of a whirlwind. The battle had shifted from the corporate boardrooms to the courtrooms, and Ava was ready to take it all the way. But there was something bigger at play now. Ava wasn't just fighting for herself or for the airline anymore. She was fighting for something greater: the right to hold the powerful accountable, to ensure that corruption and abuse didn't go unpunished. As Ava prepared for the next stage of the battle, she took a moment to reflect on everything she had lost and everything she had gained. She thought about her family, her friends, the relationships she had built along the way. The struggle had cost her more than she ever anticipated, but in the end, it had also transformed her. She had become more than a businesswoman, more than a fighter for justice. She had become a symbol of resilience, of truth in the face of overwhelming power. The days following the release of the exposé were a whirlwind of chaos and anticipation. Ava's phone buzzed non-stop, with reporters, lawyers, and investors reaching out for a piece of the action. Every news outlet was hungry for more details about the corruption within Westbrook's empire, and every word she spoke carried the weight of thousands of eyes watching. Ava had crossed a line she could never uncross, and the repercussions were just beginning. Westbrook's retaliation: it didn't take long for Westbrook to make his move. By midday, his spokesperson issued a press statement calling the exposé a malicious, baseless attack on a reputable businessman. Westbrook's legal team swiftly filed a defamation lawsuit against Ava, accusing her of manipulating the facts and distorting the truth. But it wasn't just the legal battle that was worrying Ava. Westbrook's resources were vast. His reach extended into almost every corner of the business world, from politicians to media moguls. He was a master manipulator, and if anyone could turn the tide, it was him. Still, Ava knew the truth was on her side. Every document Peter had provided, every phone call she had made, and every piece of evidence she had gathered had been thoroughly vetted. She wasn't about to back down, not now. The media frenzy as Ava's team continued to prepare for the legal battles ahead. The media frenzy raged on. The exposé had lit a firestorm of controversy, and Ava's face was now plastered across. Every news outlet, interviews, podcasts, and talk shows followed in quick succession, and she was asked about everything, from her motivations to how she managed to infiltrate one of the most powerful corporations in the world. In one particular interview with a national news anchor, Ava was asked point-blank, "What makes you think you can take down someone like Westbrook? Do you really believe the truth will win?" Ava leaned forward, her gaze steady and unwavering. "The truth always wins," she said, her voice clear. "It might take time and it might take a fight, but in the end, the truth has a way of surfacing. No matter how hard people try to bury it." The interview went viral, and her words became a rallying cry for those who believed in justice over power. But Westbrook wasn't going to let this go. Ava knew that the more popular she became, the more dangerous her situation would become. Westbrook's retaliation was inevitable. The legal storm. By the time the defamation lawsuit was filed, Ava's legal team had already prepared their defense. They knew Westbrook would try to smear her, but they were ready to counter every claim with undeniable proof. "We're not just defending her reputation," said Carla, Ava's chief legal strategist. "We're defending the integrity of everything we've exposed. If we lose here, we lose everything. This isn't just about clearing Ava's name. It's about showing the world that no one is above the law." Ava spent hours in the conference room, going over the evidence with her team. There were financial records, emails, and photographs, mountains of documents that, if the court saw them, would leave Westbrook with no escape. But the reality was that Westbrook's influence reached far beyond the courtroom. Ava had to be strategic. She couldn't afford to trust that the justice system alone would bring him down. She needed to stay several steps ahead of him. A dangerous game as the trial loomed closer. Ava's paranoia grew. Westbrook had the resources to play a long game, and she couldn't afford to be naive about the dangers that lay ahead. It wasn't just about winning in court, it was about surviving long enough to see him fall. Late one night, Ava received an anonymous tip. "Be careful," the message read. "He's going to make a move soon, don't trust anyone." Ava froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Who was this? Was it someone trying to scare her, or was it a legitimate warning? The message was unsettling, but Ava couldn't afford to let fear control her actions. She immediately called Troy. "I think he's going to come for us in a way we don't expect," she said, her voice tense. "We need to prepare for the unexpected." Troy, ever the calm one, assured her, "We're ready, Ava. We've got the truth on our side and we've got the legal team. We'll make sure he can't touch us." But Ava wasn't convinced. She knew Westbrook was capable of anything. This game was no longer just about business. It was about survival. The trap Westbrook had been silent for days after the initial media frenzy. But as Ava's team prepared for the trial, a bombshell hit. A new document was leaked. An anonymous source had sent a compromising email from one of Ava's top advisors to Westbrook's team, suggesting that they were in collaboration. The media immediately pounced. Speculation ran wild, and Ava's reputation was once again on the line. The leaked email suggested that someone within her camp had been feeding information to Westbrook. Ava was blindsided. She trusted everyone on her team, but now it seemed like someone had betrayed her. The leak was devastating. Not only did it raise doubts about her integrity, but it also gave Westbrook the ammunition he needed to attack her credibility. She quickly gathered her team to investigate. "We need to find out who did this now," Ava said, her voice hard as steel. "Someone is playing both sides, and we can't afford to let this blow up in our faces. The truth comes to light, Imonbd." Investigation into the leak was grueling. Ava's team worked tirelessly, tracking down the source of the email. After a week of digging, they uncovered a shocking truth. One of Ava's closest allies, a member of her media team, had been secretly working for Westbrook for months. The betrayal was crushing. Ava had trusted this person implicitly, and now it seemed like everything she had worked for was unraveling before her eyes. But Ava wasn't about to let this setback destroy her. If anything, it made her even more determined to take Westbrook down. "I'm not giving up," Ava declared to her team. "This betrayal may have hurt, but it's just one obstacle. We'll fix this and we'll make sure Westbrook pays for what he's done. We've come too far to turn back now." The final stand. Ava knew the endgame was in sight. The trial would begin in a matter of days, and with the evidence they had, there was no way Westbrook could come out on top. But Ava also knew the fight wasn't over. This was a war, not a battle. As the team gathered around the conference table for the final time before the trial, Ava stood in front of them, her expression fierce and unyielding. Westbrook might have the power, the money and the influence, but he doesn't have the truth, and that's what we're going to show the world, Ava said, her voice filled with conviction. "We've fought too hard, sacrificed too much, and come too far to stop now. This ends with him being exposed for the criminal he is." The room fell silent as everyone nodded in agreement. This was it, the moment of truth. The days leading up to the trial were tense, and Ava could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on her. She had crossed a line when she exposed Westbrook, and now the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about winning a case, it was about protecting everything she had worked for, and ensuring that a powerful, corrupt figure like Westbrook could never again manipulate the system to his advantage. The pre-trial drama Ava sat in her office, reviewing the final drafts of her legal strategy. Each page was meticulously laid out, every argument, every piece of evidence, every countermeasure to Westbrook's inevitable attacks. She was prepared, but she knew that the most difficult part was yet to come. The courtroom was a battlefield, and it was there that everything would be decided. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Carla. "We've got a problem." Carla's voice was tight, urgent. "We just received a message from the court. Westbrook's legal team is requesting a delay. They're pushing for a longer pre-trial period. citing complexities and new evidence that they need time to review. Ava's fist clenched around the phone. This is just another stall tactic. He's trying to buy more time, hoping we'll get worn down or make a mistake. I know, Carla replied, but we need to be prepared for this. They're going to do everything they can to push us off balance. Ava's thoughts raced. The more time Westbrook had, the more opportunities he would have to spin the narrative in his favor. She needed to act quickly and decisively before he had a chance to turn the tide in his favor. Tell the team to double down on the media push, Ava said. We're not letting him manipulate the timeline. We're going public with this, again. Ava's Media Blitzava knew the power of the press. If Westbrook thought he could hide behind legal maneuvers and stall tactics, she would remind the world of the truth. It was time for another media push, a full-on blitz that would make it impossible for Westbrook to dodge the truth, no matter how hard he tried. Her team worked quickly, issuing new statements, releasing even more evidence to the public, and arranging interviews that would keep the story at the forefront of the media's attention. Ava appeared on primetime shows and podcast interviews, each time reinforcing the gravity of the situation. She spoke not just about Westbrook's crimes, but about the systemic corruption that allowed people like him to operate unchecked for so long. In one particularly emotional interview, Ava was asked about the personal toll the case had taken on her. "Do you ever feel scared?" the interviewer asked, his voice gentle. Ava's gaze hardened. "Every day. But I'm not scared of losing. I'm scared of what happens if we don't fight back. If we don't make him pay for what he's done, then nothing changes. And nothing will ever change." Her words resonated with millions. It wasn't just about one man. It was about taking a stand, about showing the world that corruption could be beaten. A dangerous game. But Westbrook wasn't done. As Ava ramped up her media campaign, his team began attacking from another angle. They started spreading rumors that Ava had illegally obtained the evidence she was presenting in court. They claimed she had violated corporate espionage laws, making her the target of criminal investigations in addition to the civil case. It wasn't the truth, but in a world where perception often mattered more than facts, the damage was done. The media quickly latched onto the story, running with sensational headlines about Ava's potential legal jeopardy. Ava's heart sank as she saw the news scrolling across the screen of her phone. The smear campaign had begun. "They're going after you now," Troy said, his voice grim as he looked over the headlines. "This is getting ugly." Ava felt the familiar sting of fear, but she pushed it down. "They can try to destroy me, but they can't destroy the truth." The unraveling of Westbrook as the trial date loomed closer, more cracks began to appear in Westbrook's armor. Despite his efforts to paint Ava as the villain, his own past was slowly coming to light. Leaked documents, court filings, and anonymous sources continued to reveal just how deep Westbrook's criminal activities went. The media finally began to turn on him, and the public sentiment shifted. More and more people started to question how a man like Westbrook had managed to operate without being held accountable for so long. Ava's exposé had exposed a system built on manipulation, greed, and corruption, and Westbrook's public image had begun to crumble. But even as his empire began to fall apart, Westbrook wasn't going to give up easily. He doubled down on his legal defense, pulling every string he could find to delay the trial and discredit Ava. The tipping point. The night before the trial, Ava stood in her apartment, staring at the city below. She had come so far, further than she had ever imagined. But now, as the endgame approached, she felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. She had always known this moment would come, but now that it was here, it felt surreal. Troy entered the room, his expression serious. "We're as ready as we'll ever be. The team's on point, and the evidence is solid. We've got this." "Ava," she looked at him, her eyes tired but resolute. "I'm not scared of what's coming. What scares me is what happens if we lose. I've seen what people like Westbrook do when they think they can get away with it. They don't stop, they just keep getting stronger." Troy nodded. "But that's why we're doing this. Because you won't let him get away with it." Ava took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything she had sacrificed for this moment. The fight hadn't been easy. It had torn at her, chipped away at everything she thought she knew about the world. But this was it. This was the moment that would define her. "I won't back down," she said, her voice steady. "I'll see this through to the end. For me, for the people who trusted me, and for everyone who's been silenced by people like him." The opening salvo the next morning, the courtroom was filled with tension. The media had gathered in droves, and the buzz was palpable. The trial was about to begin, and everyone knew that this would be one of the most high-profile cases in recent history. As Ava entered the courtroom, her head held high, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about her. It was about sending a message to anyone who thought they were untouchable. Westbrook was already seated, his confident demeanor a sharp contrast to the uncertainty in Ava's heart. But as their eyes met across the room, Ava knew that the battle was far from over. This wasn't just a trial, this was the reckoning. The courtroom was filled with anticipation. The air was thick with tension as Ava entered the room, her eyes scanning the sea of reporters, lawyers, and onlookers who had gathered to witness the showdown between her and Westbrook. This was it, the culmination of months of hard work, strategic moves and calculated risks. She could feel the weight of the moment, but she didn't let it show. She had fought too hard to get here. Westbrook's opening move. The judge entered, and everyone stood as he took his seat. Westbrook's legal team, led by a seasoned attorney named Jonathan Sykes, was prepared for a full-on assault. They had played their cards carefully, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sykes rose first, his voice calm but filled with authority. "Your Honor, we are here today to clear the name of a distinguished businessman who has been unjustly accused of the most heinous crimes. My client, Mr. Westbrook, has been wrongfully attacked by the defendant, Ms. Ava Blackwell, who has orchestrated a media campaign filled with fabricated evidence and slanderous allegations." He paused for effect, allowing the words to sink in. "We intend to show that Ms. Blackwell's actions were not those of a whistleblower, but of a vengeful individual seeking to destroy a man's legacy for her own personal gain." Ava's jaw clenched. Westbrook was playing the victim, turning the entire case into a battle of good versus evil. He was trying to paint her as a disgruntled former employee with a vendetta, rather than the determined woman who had uncovered years of corruption. Sykes continued, "We have witnesses, evidence, and testimonies that will prove that all the allegations presented by the plaintiff are not only false, but malicious. We'll show you exactly how Ms. Blackwell has manipulated the truth to her advantage." Ava felt a surge of anger, but she kept her face neutral. This was just the beginning of the fight. She had expected this. Westbrook wasn't going to roll over easily, but what he didn't know was that she was prepared for every attack he had in store. Ava's opening statement. When her turn came, Ava stood and walked confidently to the podium. She could feel the eyes of the courtroom on her, the pressure mounting, but she had trained herself for this moment. She had rehearsed her words 1,000 times in her head. She knew what was at stake, and she wasn't about to back down. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady and clear, "this case is not about personal vendettas. This is not about destroying a man's legacy. This is about exposing the truth. Her truth that has been buried for far too long." She paused, looking around the courtroom, her gaze meeting the eyes of the jury. "Mr. Westbrook is a man who has built his empire on lies, manipulation, and the suffering of others. The evidence I will present today is not fabricated. It is not based on hearsay. It is real, it is undeniable, and it is the key to understanding the corruption that runs rampant in our business world." Ava took a breath, her fingers gripping the podium. "I am here because I believe in justice. I am here because the victims, real people, have been silenced for far too long. This trial is about holding those in power accountable, and it's about ensuring that people like Mr. Westbrook never get the chance to hurt anyone again." She met Westbrook's gaze across the room, her expression unwavering. "I won't back down. The truth is on my side, and I will make sure the world hears it." The first witness Ava's legal team was prepared. The first witness they called to the stand was Peter Matthews, the insider who had initially provided Ava with the documents exposing Westbrook's illegal activities. Peter had been hesitant at first, terrified of the repercussions of coming forward, but Ava had managed to convince him of the importance of standing up for what was right. As Peter took the stand, he looked nervous. his hands trembling slightly, but his resolve was clear. He spoke in a low, steady voice, detailing how he had worked within Westbrook's company and uncovered evidence of bribery, tax evasion, and money laundering. Ava's legal team walked him through the evidence, piece by piece. Each document was Q, displayed on the courtroom screen, clearly showing Westbrook's involvement in illegal activities. Peter described his shock when he discovered the scope of the corruption and his growing fear as he realized how dangerous it could be to expose it. "It was like a web," Peter explained, his voice growing more confident. "One crime was tied to another, and then another. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized that if I didn't act, no one else would. I knew I had to help." The jury was silent, absorbing every word. The weight of Peter's testimony hung in the air, and Ava could feel the shift in the room. Westbrook's empire was beginning to unravel piece by piece. Westbrook strikes back. Westbrook's team wasn't about to let Peter's testimony stand without a fight. As soon as he finished, Jonathan Sykes rose to cross-examine him. "Mr. Matthews," Sykes began, his tone smooth and condescending, "you claim to have been part of this so-called conspiracy, yet you were complicit in it for years. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Why wait until now to do the right thing?" Peter hesitated, clearly rattled by the aggressive questioning. He stammered, then cleared his throat. "I was scared. I didn't know who I could trust, but when I saw what Ava was doing, when I saw her standing up, I realized I had to do something." Sykes pressed harder. "So, you're telling us that after years of being part of this criminal enterprise, you suddenly decided to become a hero?" Peter's face flushed with embarrassment, but Ava could see the fire in his eyes. He wasn't backing down. "I made a mistake," he said, his voice steady, "but I'm not making one now. What I did before doesn't change the truth of what happened." The room fell silent. Ava knew Sykes was trying to discredit Peter, to paint him as unreliable and motivated by guilt, but the truth had already come through loud and clear. The jury would see it. The first breakthrough, after Peter's testimony, Ava's legal team presented more pieces of evidence, bank records, emails, and financial transactions that tied Westbrook directly to the illegal activities. Each document was a blow to Westbrook's defense, and with every piece of evidence presented, Ava felt a little more confident that they were on the right track. The media coverage was intense, with reporters waiting eagerly for each new piece of evidence to be revealed. The public's perception was shifting. Westbrook's facade was starting to crack, and the truth was coming to light. Ava's heart pounded as she watched the jury's reactions. They were listening. They were seeing the same things she had seen all those months ago, the evidence of corruption, the manipulation, and the lies. Westbrook's empire was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The battle intensifies. The opening rounds of the trial had set the tone for what was to come. Ava knew that this was only the beginning, but it was a powerful start. Every victory in court, every piece of evidence, every piece of testimony was a step closer to the final goal. Westbrook had underestimated her, and now he was on the defensive. But Ava also knew that the battle wasn't over. Westbrook would fight tooth and nail to maintain his power. He would do whatever it took to silence her, to bury the truth. Ava steeled herself for what was to come. This was the fight of her life, and she wasn't going to let him win. The days of the trial passed in a blur. Every moment felt like a battle, every question a strategic move in a larger game. Ava's mind was always 3 steps ahead, never letting herself relax, never letting her guard down. Westbrook's legal team was relentless, but Ava was sharper. The first wave of evidence had been damning, but she knew there was still more to come. The silent witness as the trial continued. Ava's team prepared to call their next witness. This one, however, wasn't someone who had spoken out publicly. He wasn't a whistleblower or a disgruntled ex-employee. No, this witness was someone who had operated in the shadows, someone whose silence had spoken volumes until now. Ava had tracked down an elusive figure, Darryl Holt, a former executive at Westbrook's company, someone who had been with him from the early days. Darryl had disappeared years ago, leaving behind a trail of questions about his sudden departure. But Ava had found him, and now he was ready to testify. It wasn't just about the facts Darryl would reveal, it was about the weight of his presence. He had been there at the center of the storm, and he knew everything about the operations that had allowed Westbrook to build his empire. But Darryl had been silent for years, too scared to come forward, too afraid of the consequences. Ava stood in the courtroom, watching Darryl take his place on the witness stand. He was older than she had imagined, his face drawn with age and stress, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the sides of the chair. "Mr. Holt," Ava's attorney began, "thank you for agreeing to testify. Can you please tell the court about your experience working with Mr. Westbrook?" Darryl nodded slowly, his eyes darting to Westbrook, who sat stone-faced across the room. "I worked for Westbrook for almost 20 years. From the beginning, it was clear that he didn't play by the rules. He knew how to manipulate people, how to stay just outside the law without ever crossing it, at least on the surface." His voice cracked slightly as he spoke, but he pushed forward. "But over time, I saw the things he did that went beyond manipulation. The bribes, the off-the-books accounts, the fake reports that would cover up his tracks. He wasn't just running a business, he was running a criminal operation. And I knew it. I just didn't know how to stop it." The courtroom was silent, the tension palpable. Ava could see Westbrook's face flicker, with a brief flash of recognition and panic. He hadn't expected this. The bombshell Darryl wasn't just recounting vague allegations, he was getting into specifics, details of illegal deals offshore, accounts and falsified records. He spoke of the hidden financials that were used to move money around without raising suspicion, of the ways Westbrook had quietly silenced anyone who dared ask questions. But the real bombshell came when Darryl spoke of a meeting that had never been revealed before, a meeting between Westbrook and a series of government officials in which they discussed how to avoid paying taxes on millions of dollars in earnings. The meeting had been recorded. Darryl had seen the tapes himself. He hadn't realized at the time how critical this information was, but now the implications were clear. "The meeting happened about 5 years ago," Darryl said, his voice low. "I wasn't supposed to be there, but I was. I overheard everything. I saw the deal being made. Westbrook had them in his pocket. They agreed to help him avoid an audit in exchange for a cut of the profits." Ava's team pounced on the statement. The room erupted as the prosecution demanded that the tapes be submitted into evidence. Westbrook's lawyers scrambled. They hadn't anticipated this witness. They hadn't prepared for Darryl's testimony to tear apart their carefully constructed defense. For the first time in weeks, Ava allowed herself a small breath of relief. This was the break she'd been waiting for. The truth was undeniable now. Westbrook's empire, built on deceit and corruption, was crumbling in front of everyone. Westbrook's desperation. As the days wore on, it became clear that Westbrook was losing his grip on the case. His legal team, though skilled, was unable to mount a counteroffensive strong enough to discredit Darryl's testimony. The evidence was overwhelming, and with each passing day it became more obvious that Westbrook had been hiding far more than anyone had imagined. In an attempt to salvage the case, Westbrook took matters into his own hands. He began using more underhanded tactics, including trying to bribe key witnesses into changing their stories. But Ava was prepared. Her team had already anticipated his every move. Carla, her trusted investigator, intercepted one of the bribe attempts before it could succeed. A witness had been approached with an offer to provide false testimony in exchange for a large sum of money. The witness, however, had come forward immediately, providing Ava with the proof she needed to expose Westbrook's attempts to manipulate the trial further. Ava couldn't believe how low Westbrook was willing to go. The case had always been about exposing corruption, but now it felt more personal. Westbrook wasn't just trying to protect his empire, he was fighting for his life. The media's shift as Darryl's testimony began to make waves. The media's tone started to shift. No longer was Westbrook's defense being met with skepticism. Now the media was questioning his every move. Reporters dug deeper into his past, uncovering new evidence that had been buried for years. It wasn't just Ava's words anymore. The entire world was starting to see the cracks in Westbrook's facade. Ava's own social media platforms were flooded with support. People from all over the world were watching the trial, and their messages flooded in. Some people offered Words of encouragement. Others shared their own stories of injustice. It was clear that Ava's fight had become a symbol of hope for many who felt powerless in the face of corruption. Her phone rang constantly, her inbox filled with messages of gratitude and support. But Ava didn't have time to dwell on the praise. She couldn't afford to get distracted. She had a mission to finish. The turning point the next morning, the defense team tried to fight back with a dramatic move. Westbrook's lawyer, Jonathan Sykes, requested an emergency hearing, claiming that the tapes Darryl had referenced were inadmissible due to technicalities in the recording process. It was a desperate attempt to dismiss the most damning evidence against their client. But Ava's team was ready. They had already anticipated this move and had prepared a counter-argument that would make it impossible for the tapes to be thrown out. The legal battle was intensifying, but Ava was feeling more confident than ever. The evidence was solid, and Darryl's testimony had been nothing short of explosive. It was only a matter of time before the jury saw the truth. The final countdown with. The trial winding down, Ava knew the next few days would be crucial. She had fought hard for this moment, but she couldn't afford to get complacent now. The final stage of the trial would determine everything. One last push to ensure that justice would be served. As she walked out of the courtroom, she couldn't help but glance at Westbrook. His once proud figure was now a shadow of what it had been. Ava knew he was feeling the pressure, the walls closing in around him. His empire was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But Ava wasn't focused on his downfall. She was focused on what came next. The victory wasn't just about taking down one man. It was about sending a message. This was about setting a precedent that no one, no matter how powerful, was above the law. The courtroom was electric with anticipation. The jury, the media, and the public, everyone was watching, waiting for the final turn in the trial. Ava's legal team had presented its case, and the evidence against Westbrook was overwhelming. But even with the odds stacked against him, Westbrook wasn't going. Down without one last fight, Westbrook's last stand. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Westbrook's legal team prepared for their final argument. Jonathan Sykes, the lead attorney, rose to his feet, his posture stiff and determined. He knew the stakes. This was it, the final chance to salvage his client's future. The room went silent as he began. "Your Honor," Sykes began, his voice booming with authority, "what we've seen here is not a case of justice being served. No, what we have witnessed is a personal vendetta disguised as a legal battle. Ms. Blackwell, for all her claims of seeking truth and justice, has built her entire case on circumstantial evidence, hearsay, and selective truths." He paused, turning his gaze toward Ava, as though challenging her to refute him. "The testimonies we've heard, particularly from Mr. Holt, are riddled with inconsistencies. The so-called tapes he mentions, they are inadmissible, unreliable, and do not hold the weight that Ms. Blackwell would have you believe." Sykes turned toward the jury. "We have proven that there is no solid evidence linking Mr. Westbrook to any illegal activity. What we have seen here is a woman with a personal agenda, trying to destroy the reputation of a man who has dedicated his life to building something great. This trial, Your Honor, has been an exercise in character assassination, not a quest for truth." Sykes ended his statement with a heavy sigh. "We ask that you dismiss all charges and allow Mr. Westbrook to go free." Ava's counterattack. The room buzzed with whispers. Westbrook's team had made their final plea, but Ava wasn't. Intimidated. She had been through too much to back down now, and she wasn't about to let him wriggle free. The truth was on her side, and she would not let it be silenced by his lies. When the judge called on her, Ava rose slowly, her presence commanding. She walked to the front of the courtroom with deliberate steps, her head held high. This was her moment, the culmination of everything she had worked for. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady but filled with a quiet power, "Mr. Sykes would have you believe that this is about me. He wants you to think that this case is motivated by personal feelings or revenge. But what he fails to address is this, the evidence." She turned and motioned toward the screen, where the damning financial documents, emails, and witness testimonies had been displayed throughout the trial. "The evidence is clear. Mr. Westbrook's company was built on lies, on corruption, and on the exploitation of the people who trusted him. And no matter how hard his team tries to cover it up, the truth cannot be erased. Ava's eyes locked, with Westbrook's across the room. His face, once filled with arrogance, now appeared strained, almost desperate. She could see the realization dawning on him. His empire was collapsing and there was no way out. "This isn't about me," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "This is about the victims, the employees whose lives were ruined, the families whose homes were lost because of Westbrook's greed. This is about ensuring that people like him are held accountable. This is about setting a precedent, so no one ever thinks they can get away with this kind of abuse again." She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. Mr. Westbrook has built his wealth on the backs of those who had no power to stop him. But now, we have the power. We have the truth, and we will not let him go free. The closing. Arguments. As Ava finished her statement, the courtroom remained silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Her legal team had already presented their case, and the evidence spoke for itself. Now it was up to the jury to decide. Ava took her seat, her gaze never leaving Westbrook. His defense team might still be scrambling for any last shred of hope, but she knew the jury had seen enough. The pieces were in place. All they had to do was connect the dots. The verdict. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Ava sat at the defense table, her hands clasped together in her lap, her eyes fixed on the door. The tension in the room was unbearable. She had fought so hard for this moment, but now all she could do was wait. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the jury filed back into the courtroom. The foreman stood and faced the judge. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Mr. Alexander Westbrook, guilty on all counts," the foreman declared. The words hit Ava like a wave crashing against the shore. She felt her heart race, her breath catch in her throat. She had done it. Westbrook, the man who had manipulated the system for years, had been brought to justice. Ava looked across the room at Westbrook, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. His world was crumbling. The empire he had built on corruption and deceit had been dismantled piece by piece, and now he would pay the price. The aftermath. The verdict sent shockwaves through the media. News outlets around the world covered the trial, heralding Ava as a hero who had taken down one of the most powerful men in the business world. Her story became a symbol of perseverance and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. But Ava knew the battle wasn't over. Westbrook would appeal the verdict, of course, and his legal team would fight tooth and nail to delay the inevitable. But the truth had won. The world knew who he really was, and that would never change. As for Ava, she wasn't interested in the fame or the accolades. This was never about her. It had always been about the people who had been hurt, the voices that had been silenced. Justice had been served, but there was still more work to do, more people to help, more battles to fight. And Ava wasn't going to stop until every last wrong had been righted. The court was still buzzing with energy after the verdict. The reporters, the cameras, the chatter. It all blended together in a loud, chaotic crescendo. That felt like the final dramatic notes of a symphony. But for Ava, everything felt strangely quiet. The weight of what had just happened hadn't quite sunk in yet. She sat alone for a moment in the empty courtroom, her hands resting on the table before her. The sound of the doors opening behind her broke the silence. It was her legal team, entering with congratulatory smiles and pats on the back. But Ava only half registered their words. She was still processing everything, the long journey, the sacrifices, the heartache. The victory had come, but it didn't feel quite like she had imagined. The weight of victory. Ava stood and turned to face her team, her lips curling into a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but carrying the fatigue of the months-long battle. Carla, her investigator, grinned. "You did it, Ava. You brought him down, and the world knows the truth now." But as Ava looked around, she couldn't ignore the quiet, gnawing feeling inside. Winning the case felt hollow, almost like an empty achievement. For so long she had focused on taking down Westbrook that she hadn't stopped to think about what would come next. There was no grand celebration, no relief. "Let's get out of here," she said, her tone light, but there was a distance in her. eyes. There's still work to do. The next steps back at her office, Ava collapsed into her chair, her body sore from the relentless stress. The day had been long, but her work wasn't over. She had won the trial, but the bigger battle lay ahead. Westbrook's empire had been destroyed, his criminal activities exposed, but it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about ensuring that those like him, who had used their power to harm others, would no longer thrive in the shadows. She picked up her phone and scanned the messages. Congratulations from friends, supportive words from strangers, and offers for media appearances. But one email caught her attention. It was from a non-profit organization that had been working to expose corporate corruption, and they wanted to meet with her. She wasn't sure why, but something inside her told her that this was the next step. Maybe it was time to look beyond just one victory. Maybe the world needed more than a courtroom win. It needed a movement. Moving beyond revenge, Ava had spent so much time focused on bringing down Westbrook that she hadn't fully grasped what that victory meant. It wasn't just about the justice for her, though that was important. It was about all the people like her, people who had been wronged, people who had faced systems stacked against them, people who had never had the chance to fight back. This was her chance to create something bigger, something lasting. In the weeks that followed the trial, Ava began to consider the future more seriously. She had the legal expertise, the knowledge, and now the public platform to build something that could truly make a difference. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about reform. She and her team started working with organizations dedicated to holding corporations accountable. They used the publicity of Westbrook's trial as a springboard to start advocating for systemic change, focusing on transparency, ethical business practices, and the need for greater oversight. It was during one of these meetings that she met with an influential senator who had followed the trial closely and was interested in sponsoring a new piece of legislation, something that would prevent individuals like Westbrook from using their wealth and influence to escape justice. "We need to put a stop to the manipulation of power," the senator said, leaning forward across the conference table. "The way Westbrook manipulated the system, it's not just him. It's happening everywhere. We need a law that holds them accountable, whether they're in a boardroom or a courtroom." Ava nodded, feeling a fire reignite within her. This was what she had been working for. This was her true purpose. Not just a courtroom win, but a chance to make a difference on a national scale, facing the past. But even as Ava looked toward the future, she couldn't shake the past. There were moments when memories of her own struggles, her childhood, the betrayal by people she had trusted, still haunted her. She had built her life on a foundation of pain, but she had also learned to turn that pain into strength. She had learned that her voice mattered, that it could be used to expose corruption and fight injustice. Late one night, as she sat at her desk reviewing case files, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Hesitant but curious, she answered. "Ava, it's me. It's Daryl." Her heart skipped a beat. Daryl Holt, the former executive who had played such a pivotal role in bringing down Westbrook. "I just wanted to say thank you for giving me the chance to speak." "For everything," Daryl said, his voice filled with emotion. "I've been living with this guilt for so long, but you gave me a chance to make it right." Ava's voice softened. "You did the right thing, Daryl. You didn't just help me. You helped everyone who's ever been hurt by men like Westbrook. You're part of the reason justice is possible." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I've been thinking a lot," Daryl said, "about what I want to do next, about how I can help. If you ever need someone to back you up, you know where to find me." Ava smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. "I think we're just getting started. The fight's not over, Daryl, but we're on the right side of it now." A new chapter. The months passed, and Ava's reputation grew. She continued working on her advocacy, pushing for legislative change, and helping to build a network of activists and legal professionals dedicated to fighting corporate corruption. She wasn't just a lawyer anymore. She was a symbol of resistance, a voice for the voiceless. But despite all the progress, Ava never forgot the lessons she had learned from her journey. She had started with a thirst for revenge, but what she had gained was far more powerful: a purpose. Justice was more than just about taking down the guilty. It was about creating a system where no one could ever escape the truth again. As she stood on the steps of the Capitol one afternoon, speaking to a crowd of supporters gathered for a rally in favor of her new anti-corruption bill, she felt something stir deep within her. This wasn't just about a fight, it was about rewriting the rules. And as the crowd cheered, Ava knew that this was just the beginning. She had taken down one empire, but now she was determined to build something even stronger. A world where justice and integrity weren't just ideals, but the very foundation of everything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough?